The story begins with Seymour Hayworth Somerset receiving a sudden order that he must raise a little girl. He felt utterly bewildered as he studied the document, doubting if he had heard the command correctly. Silence filled the spacious room, after which Seymour expressed his confusion about the intention behind this demand. It turned out the source of the command was his mother-in-law, the Dowager Freya Hayworth. She sat before him, dignified and majestic, leaning on her cane, and with a hint of sharpness in her tone, questioned Seymour if her request was truly that difficult to comprehend. The Dowager then repeated her demand more clearly, stressing that she was repeating it specifically for him. He must take in the quiet, silent little girl sitting beside her. She also added that he must grant her the Somerset family name. Meanwhile, the child looked at him innocently, her eyes twinkling with anticipation. Seymour regained his composure and asked his mother-in-law the reason for this sudden and strange decision. In his view, the combination of a sharp-tongued old woman and a little girl the size of a walnut was a bizarre and shocking pairing. He thought to himself that if it weren't for the high regard he held for his mother-in-law, whom he considered his own mother, his response would have been entirely different. He continued to think with veiled sarcasm. Did she find the Somerset household so desolate that bringing back a cat would be better than bringing a child? The Dowager was angered by his subtle response, accused him of being disrespectful, believing his tone indicated he wasn't taking her words seriously. Seymour quickly denied it, explaining that the world is full of dangers, and one cannot simply take in a stranger. But the Dowager was not convinced, sarcastically retorting, asking if he was in a hurry to hold her funeral after she died. Then, Dowager Freya sharply changed the subject, asking if he still frequently visited Rose's grave despite his busy schedule. A look of deep anguish crossed Seymour's face, and he covered his eyes with his hand, questioning why the topic of his late wife was being brought up. His mother-in-law responded angrily, condemning his attempt to stop her from speaking about her own daughter. In that moment, Seymour recalled the painful past, realizing that a full year had passed since the tragic accident. His mother-in-law had just asked how much longer he intended to live so miserably and expressed surprise that he felt it had only been a year, while to him, each day felt like a year, as if a long century had already passed. He mentally acknowledged her as a formidable opponent. A whole year had passed since his wife, Rose, was killed in a horrific carriage accident. Despite the passage of time, the scene of the accident remained vivid in his memory, as if it had happened just yesterday. He couldn't understand how he could ever forget the day he lost his entire family in that single moment. In that carriage were his only brother-in-law, Graham, and Graham's wife, as well as the woman Seymour loved to the bone. After that tragedy, all that was left for him was the heavy title of Duke of Somerset, a title that should have been inherited by his brother-in-law. Besides that title, only his brother-in-law's only child remained. Seymour believed that for his nephew, who was not yet 12, the ducal title would be a very heavy burden. Therefore, he was forced to become the Duke of Somerset in place of his brother-in-law or nephew, his anguish evident in the extinguished cigarette butts in the ashtray before him. Returning to the present conversation, his mother-in-law confronted him about his destructive lifestyle, saying she knew he only slept in his own bed a few nights each month. She continued to berate him, describing how he lived on alcohol and cigarettes like a man waiting to die, drowning himself in mountains of work. Seymour pleaded with her not to speak like that in front of the child, arguing that it was the short life he had chosen for himself, and that he believed his mother-in-law was well aware of it. Then, his mother-in-law began to voice his thoughts. He was now considering his duty, which was to uphold the name and position of the Somerset family until he could return the title to his nephew, untarnished. She exposed his fear. If he showed any weakness or made any mistakes, their relatives would descend upon the dukedom like hungry hawks, trying to seize it. Seymour could no longer contain himself and shouted in anger, asking if she realized how many times he had heard such words before, while admitting that every word she said was true. He added in a voice full of pain that as soon as he tried to pass the title to his nephew, Dante Graham, everyone would attack him over his bloodline and question the boy's legitimacy, because, in the end, he was not Seymour's son. Seymour continued his sharp argument, explaining that he had entered the family as the husband of a Hayworth daughter, and he still bore their name even now. Yet, he had taken on the Duke of Somerset title which belonged to the Graham bloodline. This meant his nephew, Dante, the rightful heir, was now a stranger with nothing. Therefore, if he wanted to pass the dukedom to Dante without interference from other Graham relatives, he had to take decisive measures. His mother-in-law interrupted him by striking the floor hard with her cane, stating that she fully understood his intentions and fears, and that what he worried about would indeed be a great disaster if it happened. She then proposed a solution to the bloodline issue that plagued him, which made Seymour look at her in confusion and surprise, wondering what she meant. Thinking she was suggesting adopting Dante into the Hayworth family, Seymour immediately rejected the idea, explaining that he couldn't do that because Dante was the direct and sole heir of the Graham bloodline. However, the dowager pointed out his misunderstanding and asked who said anything about adopting him. Instead, she revealed the real plan. He should arrange a marriage for Dante, and he would be responsible for raising this little girl to be the future bride. She explained to him that when the girl grew up, he would have her marry his nephew and then bestow the title upon them, thus solving the problem. The dowager then walked towards the child, who was smiling happily, and asked Seymour for his opinion on what she considered a perfect solution. Seymour couldn't believe what he was hearing. He told her that her suggestion was absurd and defied logic, and he couldn't find the right words to express his astonishment. He then covered his face with his hands in despair, asking if she was really asking him to raise a child for this purpose. At this point, he raised the first question about the child's identity, asking where on earth she had brought her from. The child herself answered him in a clear and cheerful voice, saying she was from the Townsend orphanage and was 10 years old. She then introduced herself with a bright and joyful smile, announcing that her name was Louina Whitfield. Louina went on to explain that it was she who had told Mrs. Hayworth of her desire to become a member of the Somerset family. Seymour was even more shocked and protested loudly to his mother-in-law, asking if she had brought the child here simply because she had expressed that wish. The dowager calmly replied, asking what was stopping them. Seymour then erupted in anger, asserting that there were many reasons against it, and that it was obvious the child was only after the family's wealth. But Louina enthusiastically interrupted him. She stood up and vehemently denied needing any wealth. She asserted that she had no interest in the Hayworth name, the Graham family, or even the Somerset title. To prove the sincerity of her intentions, she offered to sign a contract renouncing any future claims to the family or title, much to Seymour's astonishment. Seymour then asked her why she wanted to become part of the family, and she replied with touching innocence that all she wanted was to have a home. She reminded him that she was an orphan and, as he knew, she had no family. Then she began to promise him that if he took her in, she would wait for him at the door whenever he came home. She added excitedly that they would have breakfast together, and she could even draw a heart on his fried egg with sauce because she was good at that. This made Seymour mutter the word heart in confusion. She continued, approaching to sit beside him. She confessed to him that she had gathered all her courage to say these things to him. Then she leaned in closer and whispered her final promise. She would give him a good night kiss every night and asked him what he thought of that. Then, addressing him by his title, Duke, she told him they could truly become a good family. This child was Louina Whitfield, just an ordinary orphan from Townsend House. She had just turned 10. Her name was very common, one of the most frequently used names in her orphanage. She had nothing special or outstanding about her, except for being just a little bit luckier than the other children there. The scene shows Louina strolling happily across a green meadow after finding a rare four-leaf clover. Her fellow orphans gathered around her, their faces filled with surprise and admiration, fascinated by her ability to find yet another one. Holding the plant in her hand, Louina thought to herself how lucky she was, this being the 7th one she had found. But behind this superficial joy, she hid a huge secret. She was not just an ordinary girl, but had been reincarnated as a character in a book she had read in her previous life. The scene flashes back to a few days earlier, specifically on Thanksgiving Day, when the Townsend Orphanage was holding its annual group birthday celebration for the children who didn't know their real birthdays, allowing them to share the joy of blowing out cake candles. Perhaps it was because she had blown out the candles too hard that day. She felt a sudden wave of dizziness that made her lose her balance, and suddenly fainted in the middle of the party. The scene descended into chaos as terrified children shouted for their teacher, announcing that Louina had collapsed. During her unconsciousness, she thought with bitter irony how unlucky she was to have fallen on her birthday of all days, taking back her earlier words about being lucky. After 3 painful days and nights, she finally woke up to find a doctor beside her telling those around them that if his diagnosis was correct, there was no hope for the child's recovery. The doctor confirmed that her best hope was to live for another 5 years, as her illness was incurable, informing her that she was terminally ill. Louina didn't register what she had heard, wondering if this doctor was crazy to describe her as pitiful. She thought about how she was only 10 years old, and if she could only live for 5 more years, she would die at 15. She felt a great sense of injustice, because whenever she found 2 4-leaf clovers, she would always give one to the old man at the orphanage. Her sense of injustice extended to the teachers who accepted this so easily, even though she was always kind to everyone and shared her food. It was too cruel, and even in her dreams during the 3 days she was unconscious, memories of her past life came flooding back, a time when she was just an ordinary student who loved cute things and good food. She was always looking for interesting novels to read, until that ordinary life came to an abrupt end after being hit by a truck, and she died at a young age. Those memories and feelings were still so clear in her mind that she even remembered the novel she was reading at the time, titled Until the Lily Wilts. The novel revolved around a female protagonist who, like her, was terminally ill. Here, she recalled the name of the disease from the novel, Lily Disease. Suddenly, she realized a terrifying fact. The doctor had told her that she, too, had Lily Disease. The doctor explained that after the fever subsides, there might not be any obvious symptoms, but white spots would spread all over the body, causing it to rot until death. He confirmed it was an incurable, terminal illness, and on the day right after she turned 10, she received her final diagnosis. Then she realized what she had seen was not just a dream. She had indeed been reincarnated into the world of the novel she had read. What was worse, she was just a nameless extra. Despair washed over her as she wondered why she had to be an extra, and most importantly, a terminally ill orphan. But amidst all this misery, there was a silver lining. She knew the cure for this disease because Lily Disease only existed in the novel she had read in her past life, Until the Lily Wilts. The novel was a traditional reverse harem story, where the heroine, as sickly and beautiful as a lily, suffered among the male leads who were obsessed with her. The novel's protagonist suffered from the same illness and embarked on a journey to find a cure, and fate led her to meet Seymour, one of the male lead candidates, and her ordeal began. The reason for her suffering was that Seymour was a hidden villain because she resembled his late wife, and he became obsessed with her. Although he eventually brought the cure for the woman he loved, the problem was that the cure only appeared at the beginning of the novel's plot, meaning that for the next 7 years, the cure did not exist in this world. By then, she would be long dead. At this point, Louina decided she couldn't let this happen. She refused to die a miserable and meaningless death like in her previous life. Louina stood before a mirror, lost in thought, wondering how to meet Seymour, as he wasn't just a nobleman, but a duke, the hidden villain of the original story, while she was just an orphan from a remote orphanage. As the church bells rang outside, she kept wondering in despair if there was any way to achieve this. Suddenly, a girl came in excitedly and asked if she was ready, confusing Louina, who didn't know what she was talking about. The girl laughed, saying she seemed absent-minded because of her illness, and then reminded her that today was the day to volunteer at a sponsor's house. That's when Louina remembered it being mentioned in a meeting. The girl urged her to get ready quickly, warning her to be extra careful because they would be meeting Mrs. Hayworth today. Louina froze upon hearing the name Hayworth, as the name sounded very familiar. As she searched her memories of the novel, she suddenly realized that Mrs. Hayworth was Seymour's mother-in-law and the only person who could handle his arrogant personality. In fact, she was like a real mother to him. Here, Louina excitedly thought about how she had missed this shortcut to Seymour. Mrs. Hayworth, the widow of the late Marquis, was the person with absolute authority in the Hayworth family. But since losing her only daughter, Rose Hayworth, she had also become an eccentric figure, inspiring awe in the hearts of the orphanage children due to her gloomy aura. She would harshly criticize any small detail she saw, like a child wiping their nose or another's mismatched buttons. Louina recalled other details from the novel. Mrs. Hayworth was an extreme perfectionist, and her son-in-law was none other than Seymour Graham himself, the second son of the Duke of Somerset, whom the Hayworth family had adopted in his youth to be their daughter's husband. He became Seymour Hayworth. Later, one day, after the sudden death of the Duke of Somerset, Seymour inherited the title and became the Duke of Somerset, while also being the son-in-law of the Hayworth house, thus effectively becoming the master of two families. Although his marriage was a political one, he loved Rose more than anyone, and Mrs. Hayworth was not just his mother-in-law, but his mother, and the only one who shared his grief. Hope flickered on Louina's face. Mrs. Hayworth was a sponsor of the Townsend orphanage, which meant that if things went well, she might be able to meet Seymour. But she quickly came to her senses, realizing that just meeting Mrs. Hayworth didn't guarantee she would meet Seymour. However, she returned to positive thinking. She had always been lucky in finding four-leaf clovers, and having memories of her past life was a form of luck in itself. She mustered her courage and decided to move forward with this life-saving mission. But a few hours later, she found herself in a predicament, desperately wondering what to do. She felt like she didn't even have a chance to start. She had thought things would go smoothly, but what happened was that one of the children suddenly sneezed near Mrs. Hayworth, which earned her displeasure. Louina felt it was all over. Her plan had failed before she could even open her mouth. A stern and terrifying expression appeared on Mrs. Hayworth's face, while the child who sneezed trembled in fear. Louina thought in panic. What should she do now? Unfortunately, the day she had chosen was precisely when Mrs. Hayworth was hosting a special event, a ladies' tea party. She had planned to use this opportunity to at least start a conversation with her, but Martin's sneeze had completely ruined everything, and she wondered if this was the end, without achieving anything. Meanwhile, a teacher was harshly scolding Martin, telling him to sit quietly and demanding he immediately apologize to the lady for his rudeness. The child stammered an apology, but the teacher ordered him not to stutter and to speak clearly, which made him burst into tears. Mrs. Hayworth suddenly intervened, saying that was enough, as seeing the child cry like that upset her. She then had her servant, Henry, take the child away and comfort him. Those present were surprised by the generosity of Mrs. Hayworth, who was usually very strict about etiquette, and they decided not to bring children with pollen allergies anymore, while Louina wondered in confusion what had just happened. Louina began to ponder the reason for Mrs. Hayworth's unusual tolerance and realized that perhaps if she used this situation well, she could get some time alone with her. Just then, a noble lady suggested they take a walk in the estate's beautiful spring garden. Accompanied by the children, another lady agreed with the idea and pointed out that their numbers were perfect for walking in pairs, which made Louina feel her chance had come. Louina seized the opportunity, boldly approached Mrs. Hayworth, introduced herself as Louina Whitfield, and then asked for permission to learn elegance and nobility from her. Mrs. Hayworth noted that this was the child who had been sneaking glances at her, and thought to herself that it had been a long time since she had seen a child who wasn't afraid of her. Although she hadn't planned on taking a walk, she agreed to Louina's request, saying that as long as it was what she wanted, there was no reason to refuse her. She invited her to walk with her on the designated path, but Louina flatly refused, announcing that she had no interest in walking at all, which caused surprise and shock among everyone present. A teacher hurriedly apologized, thinking the child had misunderstood something, while scolding Louina for saying such a thing. But Louina ignored them and continued speaking to Mrs. Hayworth, expressing her admiration for her elegant accent, and offered to read a book to her while learning that accent from her. This bold request impressed Mrs. Hayworth, who thought that not only was this child not afraid of her, but she was also bold enough to ask for what she wanted. Mrs. Hayworth agreed to her request and ordered her servant, Henry, to prepare a place for reading within the manor, much to Louina's delight, as she had succeeded in getting alone time with the Dowager Marchioness. She felt things might be easier than she had anticipated, and as soon as they were alone, Mrs. Hayworth took the initiative to ask for her name again. Then, Mrs. Hayworth directly questioned her about the reason for her ploy, which confused Louina. Mrs. Hayworth told her she was well aware that she hadn't invited her in just for a reading session and demanded that she not play tricks on her. That's when Louina realized her plan had been seen through. But before Mrs. Hayworth could respond, Louina preempted her with a sudden question, pointing out that she, too, suffered from pollen allergies, just like the child Martin. A look of confusion crossed Mrs. Hayworth's face, so Louina continued to explain that the garden was not a comfortable place for her. She revealed to her that she had noticed that when Martin sneezed, she had also sneezed slightly, and that was the reason for her tolerance towards him, because he suffered from the same allergy. She thought to herself that she knew adults' noses and throats weaken with age, because the old doctor at the orphanage always told her so. Mrs. Hayworth asked if she had noticed this from the beginning and had been observing her for that reason. Louina denied it and asked if she could tell her the truth. Mrs. Hayworth agreed to hear her out. Louina then told her she had a request, which was why she was eager to be alone with her. Mrs. Hayworth coldly wondered what request she could possibly have, which made Louina smile nervously and confirm her request. But Mrs. Hayworth flatly rejected her request, expressing surprise that a little thing like her would drag her in to ask for a favor, and warned her that she was gravely mistaken if she thought she would be lenient just because she was a child. Louina was shocked by the direct refusal, while Mrs. Hayworth grabbed a bell to summon her servant. She ordered him to call the teacher and have this child taken out immediately, which made Louina panic. She was about to be kicked out before she could even mention the first letter of Seymour's name. When the servant arrived, Louina gathered her courage, realizing she had worked too hard for this opportunity and had to say something. Louina slammed the table and shouted, addressing Mrs. Hayworth by her full name, and then revealed her true request. She wanted the lady to allow her to kiss her cheek before she left in the carriage. She added that she knew she was not a simple opponent, but if that were the case, she would resort to another plan, explaining that every time she walked through the village streets and saw children kissing adults on the cheek, she felt incredibly jealous. Louina continued her touching speech, explaining that as an orphan, she had no adult to kiss, and she was curious about what it felt like, so she wanted to ask her for the chance if she could. She declared that she would use all possible means to achieve her goal. A moved expression appeared on Mrs. Hayworth's face, as she thought to herself that this child had gone to such great lengths for such a simple request. Most of her visitors came seeking business investments or had hidden motives, thinking she was an easy target after losing her husband and daughter, yet this child wanted nothing more than a kiss on the cheek. This strange behavior reminded her of what her late daughter, Rose, was like as a child. Unconsciously, Mrs. Hayworth found herself thinking of Rose. Then she regained her composure and told Louina that she understood her feelings, and since her request was not difficult, she would grant her wish. As Louina was leaving, the teacher was waiting for her by the carriage, so Louina kissed Mrs. Hayworth's cheek and promised to visit her again, to which the lady welcomed. This scene left all the teachers and children present shocked and amazed, as they had never imagined a child would kiss the Dowager Marchioness. As the carriage drove away, Louina kept waving at Mrs. Hayworth. After Louina left, Mrs. Hayworth summoned her servant, Henry. She ordered him to have the chef look for dessert recipes that children might like. Meanwhile, on the way back, Louina explained what had happened to her friends with a bright smile. The next morning at the orphanage, Martin, the child who had sneezed at the party, gave Louina a gift, much to her surprise. The gift was an orange, which he gave her to thank her for what she did at the tea party. Thanks to her, things went smoothly and no one got angry. One of the girls commented that Louina had acted magically that day, even kissing the lady's cheek, which surprised the director, but Louina downplayed it, feeling a little guilty because she had done it for her own plan. Suddenly, a girl appeared, angrily wondering why there was such a fuss over a mere kiss. As she scolded the others and ordered them to go clean the kitchen, another girl was complaining that Louina got an extra egg for breakfast, which she considered special treatment. But another girl replied that they were probably trying to get close to her, anticipating that she would join the Hayworth family. The first girl dismissed this idea, saying it was impossible for the most ordinary child in the orphanage, like Louina, to join the Hayworth family. Louina, enjoying her orange, paid no mind to their conversation. The girl kept repeating that old people were just like that, and that the lady would have been just as happy if she had been the one to kiss her. Louina realized her fame had skyrocketed since that day, and everyone's attention in the orphanage had turned to her, making her a target for the jealous. Louina confronted the jealous girl, suggesting she try kissing the lady herself next time. This suggestion angered the girl, causing her to stammer. A teacher looking for Louina interrupted them, telling her to get ready to leave. When Louina asked where they were going, the teacher told her that Mrs. Hayworth had sent a carriage for her, which surprised both Louina and the other girl. Louina thought in shock, wondering if this meant her charm had worked on Mrs. Hayworth. I was overjoyed and decided it was time to launch the charm offensive at full force. That night, Louina waited in the living room of Hayworth Manor, thinking that it was a wise move of hers to have the magic trio ready just in case. But she waited for a long time and began to feel anxious, noticing that the servants had been bustling in and out ever since she arrived. Suddenly, the servant Henry came in and regretfully told her that she had to leave today. Louina refused to leave before seeing Lady Hayworth, saying she had something to tell her and couldn't go before showing the lady her magic trio set. Meanwhile, she overheard the servant talking to a maid, saying the situation was serious and that Lady Hayworth's condition had worsened since the morning. She heard him asking about the doctor who was traveling, and the maid told him they had just received word that the doctor had only just departed, which shocked Louina, who wondered what was happening. Anxiety washed over Louina as she hid and observed the servants, worried that something terrible had happened to Lady Hayworth, and also concerned that she would miss this opportunity, not knowing when she would see her again. Therefore, she decided not to give up and followed them to see what was going on. She heard a maid say that the lady had woken up briefly, but soon fell asleep again, complaining that the nausea hadn't gone away and that she was sweating a lot, having never been so exhausted before, and they didn't know what to do. Another maid anxiously wondered what would become of the Hayworth family if something happened to the lady. The servant Henry scolded her, telling her not to speak such nonsense, and ordered her to fetch some warm water to wipe off the sweat. When Louina learned that Lady Hayworth was unwell, she decided to go to her room. She slipped in when no one was around, remembering that in the original novel, Lady Hayworth had already passed away by this point. She only appeared in Seymour's memories, and whenever that happened, he would say how he wished Lady Hayworth were still alive at times like this. But the plot of the original novel began 7 years later, so she thought she was safe for now. However, this unexpected incident made her wonder if this illness was the cause of the lady's death. She noticed the lady's symptoms: lethargy, cold sweats, and no obvious external injuries. Suddenly, she realized these symptoms were familiar to her. Just then, the servant Henry walked in, surprised to see her, and asked how she got in before asking her to leave as the lady needed to rest. But Louina ignored him and loudly demanded that he bring sugar water immediately. She insisted on her request, stressing that it had to be brought right away. A while later, Lady Hayworth woke up to find herself in her room and saw Louina by her side, asking how she got in. Louina told her that she was awake now. She went on to explain that the lady had fainted due to low blood sugar, so she had prepared sugar water for her. Lady Hayworth asked if she had waited until she woke up, and Louina answered in the affirmative, admitting that the butler had asked her to leave, but she was so worried that she took it upon herself to stay and expressed her apologies. She explained to the lady that when she saw the symptoms, she found them very similar to the symptoms of hypoglycemia that the old doctor at the orphanage had taught her, so she couldn't just stand by. She added that she thought the first aid she had learned might be helpful to the lady and apologized again for staying without permission. Louina also told her that the doctor had said the condition wasn't serious as long as it was continuously managed. This made Lady Hayworth smile, thinking to herself that this girl had helped her once again today. She noticed the bed was covered in flowers made of cloth. When she asked about them, Louina told her that a servant had brought her a set of fabrics, and she had made the flowers while waiting for the lady to wake up. The lady looked at the flowers, remembering that she had made many of them with her daughter, Rose, when she was young, and never expected to see them again. Lady Hayworth smiled and thanked Louina. The lady said that thanks to her, the emergency was over. Louina smiled humbly, while the lady thought to herself that she was a rare child who was both kind-hearted and well-mannered. Lady Hayworth decided to reward Louina for her good deed and told her that although Seymour was the official head of the Hayworth family, she was the one who managed the family's internal affairs. This meant that all of Hayworth's assets were under her control. Then, she offered Louina a reward befitting the act of saving her life, and asked if she had thought about it. Next, she suddenly made a proposal, asking if she would like to join the Hayworth family, which left Louina completely stunned. Lady Hayworth assured her that she would not bring shame to the Hayworth name, and asked if she accepted the offer. She added that if she accepted, she could eat delicious meals every day and wear many beautiful clothes. This made Louina incredibly excited, thinking to herself if this meant she could eat delicious cake every day and would no longer have to share clothes with other children. Louina thought Lady Hayworth's invitation to join the family was an incredible offer, especially recalling their first meeting. However, despite her deep gratitude, she told the lady that it might be a bit difficult, as it wasn't what she originally wanted. Lady Hayworth was surprised by her answer and asked what she meant by difficult. Subsequently, Louina revealed her true goal. She wanted to become a ward of the Duke of Somerset, not Lady Hayworth's. Lady Hayworth told her it would be better for her to join the Hayworth family, but Louina replied that she had heard from the maids that Duke Seymour was going through a difficult time after losing his family. She added that she knew Lady Hayworth was also deeply worried about him. She went on to explain that besides being the head of the Somerset family, the Duke also managed the affairs of the Hayworth family, which made those around him try to take the ducal title from him. In the worst-case scenario, he might not even be able to pass the title to his nephew, which would cause him immense guilt. Seeing the sadness in the lady's eyes as she watched him pained Louina's heart. Louina continued to state her plan, saying she had carefully considered what she could do to alleviate their fears. Since the nephew who would inherit the title had a different surname, she believed that if she became a ward and married that nephew, she could create justification and legitimacy for the transfer of the title. She admitted that she didn't really know what the nephew was like, but that didn't matter to her, because no matter what, if she married him, she would become a member of their family. Most importantly, it meant that the nights Lady Hayworth spent worrying about the Duke would disappear, and as long as she could ease their worries in this way, she would be content. Lady Hayworth was deeply moved, grabbing Louina's hand and saying she was more thoughtful and profound than she had imagined. She told Louina that she fully understood her intentions and believed she could handle the gossip that would arise from her origins. But she proposed one condition. If she wanted to become Seymour's ward on the condition of marrying her grandson, she must first do one thing. Cutting back to the present, Louina stood before Seymour, smiling as she told him they could become a real family. Seymour looked extremely confused, telling her he didn't really understand what she was saying, nor how she had won the favor of his mother-in-law. But he warned her that if her goal was the heir's position, it was absolutely not allowed. So Louina quickly denied it, and to prove her words, she showed him an agreement she had signed with the lady, promising never to covet the heir's position. Seymour was surprised by the existence of the agreement, at which point his mother-in-law interrupted him, telling him to just raise her first and complaining about his lack of flexibility at his young age. Seymour shouted, asking how he was supposed to raise a child, to which his mother-in-law replied that it wasn't like she was asking him to care for a baby, that it wasn't difficult, and that she wasn't asking him to personally care for her, as she was well aware that a child of that age could grow up just fine under the guidance of a private tutor. Seymour disdainfully wondered if she was serious, thinking this was utterly ridiculous. At this point, Louina intervened and apologized to the Duke, explaining that it was because she had stubbornly insisted on becoming a ward of the Seymour family, and the lady had graciously accepted despite this. She revealed to him that Lady Hayworth had initially invited her to join her own family, but as an orphan who had never received love, she understood the feelings of others very well. She told him that she realized the lady always thought of him first, worrying about and caring for him more than anyone else. For that reason, she wanted to ease Lady Hayworth's worries, even if just a little. She continued, saying she didn't want to be just a family member in name only, but to become a real family that shares their hearts. She assured him she had no ambitions and that all she wanted was to be someone he would check on and worry about a little from time to time, and that would be enough for her. Then she asked him sorrowfully if that was impossible. In that moment, Seymour wondered in amazement how a child not yet 10 years old could understand their situation so clearly, and she must have known that joining his mother-in-law's family was the easier path. Yet she insisted on becoming a ward and writing an agreement, all just because she wanted to become a real family to lighten their burden. After careful consideration, Seymour Seymour took the agreement and decided to read it carefully. Louina addressed him as Your Grace, the Duke, to which he replied, yes, and she enthusiastically told him he could take as long as he wanted to look at it. Seymour noticed she was unusually calm, a calmness beyond what could be expected from a child her age. Yes, just like that child, his nephew. That night, at Seymour's home, Louina lay on her new bed, happily thinking that things were going even more smoothly than she had expected. She hadn't even dared to hope they would allow her to live in the ducal mansion. While reviewing the documents, she realized it was all thanks to Lady Hayworth's strong support. Now all she had to do was slowly get closer to Seymour and get the medicine. She jumped on the bed, feeling incredibly happy, realizing that she had survived for now. But suddenly, she sat up in bed, remembering something she had almost forgotten. She was surprised to find the maid, Heir, still awake, and asked if she couldn't sleep. Louina then asked her if she knew where the Duke's room was. Heir was surprised that she was asking this question so late at night. So Louina smiled and told her that she had made a promise to the Duke. Meanwhile, a servant was reading a report to Seymour, telling him it was Lady Louina's first day and asking if he needed to check on her sleeping arrangements. Seymour coldly replied that there was no need for that. She could just go to sleep. His assistant, Axel Portman, intervened and told him that despite what he said, he had given her the brightest room in the mansion, wondering if he cared about the young lady. Axel continued, pointing out that she seemed to like him more than expected, and at this rate, he might end up adopting her. Seymour suddenly stood up, and Axel asked where he was going so late. Seymour replied that his mother-in-law had requested he stay at the mansion on the child's first day, and he was just reluctantly finishing his work in the office, but since it was past midnight, he could go work elsewhere. Axel condemned this logic. As Seymour was about to open the door, he heard a voice from outside say, "Oh, you open it first." He recognized the voice. Louina was standing before him in her pajamas, announcing that she had come to give him a good-night kiss. Seymour asked in confusion, "A good-night kiss?" Louina enthusiastically replied that she had promised him she would do this every time, now that he had taken her in. Seymour refused, saying he didn't need it and that he still had work to finish. But Louina strongly objected, asserting that he couldn't work so late and that adults need to sleep at night or their health would suffer. She grabbed his hand, saying it couldn't be like this, demanding they go together, and offered to read him a book. She pulled him along, urging him to hurry. Seymour thought to himself that before going to work, he had no choice but to indulge her for a little while. In the bedroom, Louina was reading a story aloud to him. Reading, finally, the prince found the dragon sleeping deep in the forest. The prince thought that if the dragon woke up, the village would be in danger again. But when he looked at it up close, it seemed gentler than he had imagined, which made Seymour feel like this situation was driving him crazy. After a moment of thought, Louina continued reading. The prince took out his cloak, not his sword. At this, Seymour thought to himself that she said she had learned to read aloud at the orphanage, but her voice was almost too clear. She finished reading. Then he covered the dragon with his cloak, and at that very moment, a fairy appeared from behind a tree. The fairy went on to speak to the prince, explaining that the dragon was cursed to sleep forever, and the only way to awaken it was with the touch of a kind-hearted person, and she told him that it had awakened the poor dragon. Listening to the story, Seymour wondered to himself, did the dragon really want to wake up? Wouldn't it be better to sleep forever? He added that he often thought this way since the accident, wondering if the dragon would resent the prince for waking it. But he noticed that these dark thoughts weren't bothering him today, perhaps because the voice Louina read to him and was unusually bright, even though he thought this was all completely unnecessary. He fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, a maid entered Seymour's room, thinking he must have drunk too much again last night. Since his wife's death, he had grown accustomed to relying on alcohol to sleep, and she hoped to see fewer empty bottles today. But she was surprised to find a storybook by the bed and wondered why it was there. She was even more shocked when she found the Duke asleep with Louina sleeping right beside him. Seymour woke up to bright sunlight and the sound of birds, realizing he had slept soundly, with no headache or the effects of a hangover. His servant came in with tears of joy, amazed that his master had fallen asleep without a single drop of alcohol, and said it must be thanks to Lady Louina. Seymour angrily asked why no one had woken him up, and then asked where the little troublemaker was. The servant told him she was having her meal and suggested he eat with her, but he flatly refused. In the dining room, Louina was enjoying a luxurious breakfast the likes of which she had never seen at the orphanage. The chef told her he was glad she liked the food and to eat a lot. Louina happily thought to herself that she had fallen asleep next to the Duke without realizing it yesterday, and was glad he wasn't angry. She had hoped they could eat together, but it was a shame he had already gone to work. Nevertheless, she felt she might have won some of his favor through this incident, bringing her one step closer to getting her treatment. Her enjoyment of the food was interrupted by a messenger who brought a letter from the Dowager Countess Hayworth. After her meal, the messenger, Hugo, handed her the letter. It began with "My dear Louina," asking how her first day at the Somerset mansion was, and telling her to let her know if that ill-tempered man had bothered her. Louina answered in her head that he hadn't bothered her, but they had slept peacefully together. The lady continued in the letter, saying she would visit the mansion in a few days and telling her to eat well and sleep well until she saw her healthy face. This made Louina very happy, as she would be praised for making the Duke fall asleep. But she was startled by a note at the end of the letter that read, "The child you wanted to see will also be coming." Louina thought in shock. Could she be referring to Dante Graham, Seymour's nephew and the heir of Somerset? A few days later, the day of Lady Hayworth's long-awaited visit arrived. Upon seeing her, Louina thought to herself how strange it was that she had chosen her just so she could live. Lady Hayworth asked if she was doing well, and Louina replied enthusiastically, wondering to herself why she felt so excited and happy to see her again. Was it because she had gotten used to this life in her quest for treatment? She then began to excitedly tell her about the delicious food she ate every day, the comfortable bed, and the pretty clothes, admitting she was being talkative only because she was so happy to see her. Then she proudly added that she had succeeded in making Duke Seymour sleep early after reading him a fairy tale by his side. This surprised Lady Hayworth, who described what Louina had done as nothing short of incredible. It was the first time Seymour had fallen asleep with someone else present. Then Lady Hayworth told her that, just as she had written in her letter, she had brought the child with her. Louina realized her intuition was correct. Lady Hayworth called the boy over, while Louina thought to herself that today she would finally meet him, the boy who might become her future husband. Standing before them was Dante Graham. In the blink of an eye, Louina found herself alone with Dante in a room full of desserts, wondering how they ended up alone. Lady Hayworth had left them to get to know each other, while she went to check if Seymour was neglecting his household duties again, which made Louina secretly hope the lady would return quickly. Louina tried to muster her courage, reminding herself that this was her original goal, and if she couldn't marry Dante, she would have to go back to the orphanage. She would continue to suffer from her illness until she died, and that absolutely could not happen. Therefore, she had to get close to him, no matter the cost. But the frown on his face was already making her anxious. Then she thought of the cake. Everyone likes cake. She called his name and offered him some, pointing out that the desserts made by the chef here were excellent and that she was sure he would like them. But he responded to her coldly, warning her not to think of this as her home, because in the end, he was the heir to the family. Louina was shocked by his unexpected reaction and tried to tell him he had misunderstood her, but he cut her off, telling her to forget it and that he didn't want to hear her out, thinking it was the adults who forced this arrangement on them anyway. Then he got up and left. Louina was shocked, wondering if he thought she was here to snatch the heir's position. She decided she had to catch up to him and explain the misunderstanding. He disappeared quickly. She wondered in confusion if he had already run out of the mansion. She felt lost, as she wasn't yet familiar with the mansion's layout, and wished she could get a clear view from a high place. Just then, she remembered the huge tree in the garden and thought that since it was the biggest tree in the mansion, she might be able to find Dante if she climbed it. She decided to sneak over and come back before anyone noticed she was gone. She wasn't the tree-climbing champion at the orphanage for nothing. Once at the top of the tree, she was stunned by the incredible height, realizing the Duke's estate and the orphanage were on completely different levels. But she quickly remembered this was no time for admiration. If she couldn't find Dante, her first impression on him would be completely ruined. She started looking for him everywhere. Soon she spotted him sitting alone in a corner and realized he hadn't gone far. She decided to go after him and explain that she didn't care about the heir's position, but she stopped when she heard voices. She saw two men walking in the garden, one of whom looked like Duke Seymour. She noticed that Dante hadn't spotted them yet. Then she saw the Duke walking straight toward Dante. Louina thought to herself that at the orphanage, you'd get scolded for running around without permission. If she let things continue, they were bound to run into each other. Dante would be caught red-handed sneaking away when he was supposed to be listening to Lady Hayworth. Under the circumstances, she decided she had to get their attention, so she shouted from the top of the tree. She called out to Duke Seymour. Dante stopped, surprised by the voice coming from the treetop, and looked for its source. Louina smiled and waved at the Duke from between the branches, welcoming him and expressing her surprise that he was home so early. Then she offered to help prepare tea or take a walk in the garden. Seymour asked in surprise why she was in a tree, and she cheerfully replied that she was playing hide-and-seek with Dante. Louina felt a sense of relief, having successfully drawn his attention and avoided an awkward situation. But the man with Seymour seemed deeply moved. The man muttered in amazement, commenting on Louina's perfection, which confused Louina. The man continued to marvel, saying she was neither too aristocratic nor rustic, but a truly beautiful young girl. Then he declared that she would be his model, which confused Louina even more. A few hours before this meeting, Seymour was in his office writing a letter when he learned that Lady Hayworth had visited the ducal mansion. He concluded she wasn't there to see him, or she would have come to the office. She was obviously there to see the child. His assistant, Axel, confirmed this, adding that they seemed to be getting along very well. Axel continued, saying the servants were full of praise, saying she was very friendly and got along with people quickly. Seymour thought to himself that she was indeed overly friendly and recalled how she had come to see him a few days ago. She had walked in enthusiastically with a new book. She told him she would read him this book today and that she had changed the story genre so he wouldn't get bored. A look of confusion appeared on Seymour's face. From that day on, she started coming to his room as soon as he finished work, staying by his side, and reading fairy tales until he fell asleep. This happened several times until her daily arrival became routine. One day, while Seymour was working in his office, Axel told him the carriage to go home had arrived. Seymour replied that he had told them he wasn't returning to the mansion today. Axel, however, replied that Lady Louina herself had sent the carriage and insisted that he leave work on time. Not only did she stop him from working overtime, but he eventually found himself leaving work at a set time every day. Even after returning to the mansion, he would listen to her read fairy tales at night until he fell asleep. In addition to that, she stubbornly insisted on having breakfast with him every morning. When he left for work, she would see him off and ask him to come back early. Seymour looked at her as he left and mumbled his agreement. In his office, he thought to himself that he only accepted her presence because he couldn't ignore his mother-in-law's clamoring. But since the child's arrival, his physical condition had indeed improved slightly. Axel interrupted him, pointing out that the servants all had smiles on their faces these days, and it seemed they welcomed the young lady very much. He added enthusiastically, pointing to Seymour's improved complexion and more efficient work. Axel continued, saying he had never felt so relieved for his master as he did these days. But Seymour ordered him to shut up and get out, while Axel grumbled that he was speaking from the heart. Just then, Derek, the head of the brand planning department, walked in nervously. Seymour asked if there was a problem. Derek told him that the child model for the children's clothing line had contacted them, saying he had injured his face and would be halting all activities. Derek told Duke Seymour they had to find a new model, which made Seymour wearily take off his glasses and agree that a replacement had to be found. But Derek explained that it wasn't easy, as the photo shoot was scheduled for the next day, and they knew very well how difficult it had been to find the first model. Seymour's company was primarily a commercial distribution company. The reason such a company established a clothing brand was to distribute a batch of naturally dyed cotton fabrics they had imported. This coincided with a wave of simple and rustic living that was popular in high society. Noble ladies began to pursue natural looks instead of shimmering silks and expensive jewels. So Seymour planned to capitalize on this trend. For this marketing campaign, he hired the commercial artist Heir. He was considered the most famous among the nobility at the time and an indispensable talent for promoting any high-end brand. But the problem was Heir's temperament. He would shout angrily that this wasn't the feeling he wanted. He was famous for refusing to work if he didn't like the model. He continued to clamor, explaining that he wanted something healthy, pure, elegant yet humble, a child who looked like a wildflower rather than an expensive bouquet of roses. Cutting back to Seymour's office, his assistants were desperately wondering where to find a child who met these requirements. Axel hesitated for a moment, then told Seymour that there might be a suitable one in the mansion right now. Sure enough, the moment Aubert saw Louina in the garden, he knelt before her in fascination, declaring her a pure, untainted child. He added to his description, saying she looked like a forest fairy. Louina looked at him in confusion, pointing to herself and asking if he was talking about her. Aubert confirmed with great enthusiasm that it was her and that she possessed the perfect aura he was looking for. Then he stood up and walked around with dramatic gestures, feeling a burst of inspiration, thinking that everything from the temperature and humidity to the overall atmosphere and the scattered leaves was absolutely perfect, and declared that if this child were the model, he could draw anything. Louina walked over to Seymour to ask about the man's identity, thinking to herself that he must be that up-and-coming painter, Aubert. Seymour placed his hand on Aubert's head and explained to Louina that he thought she might be a good fit for a job he was working on, so he had come specifically to ask for her consent. He assured her that he wouldn't force her to do anything she didn't want to, and that she could refuse if she felt it was beyond her energy. He then promised that if she agreed to help him, he would grant her any request in return. Seymour looked at Louina, thinking that his request was sudden and it would be natural for a child to be disinclined to accept, and he was pondering how to persuade her. But Louina came to a surprising conclusion. She remembered reading about this plot point in the novel before. This was Seymour's failed business venture, briefly mentioned in the novel, and it all began because he couldn't find a suitable child model for clothes. From that point on, Seymour's affairs began to gradually collapse. He lost a huge investment, the company began to falter, and he himself became sharper and stricter. Louina thought about it from the opposite perspective. If she solved this problem, it meant she could get the treatment medicine faster. So, with a radiant smile, she immediately and enthusiastically agreed. Seymour was surprised by her swift decision and asked if she had really decided so quickly. Louina smiled and replied that she was happy to help him, and if there was anything she could do, she should do her best to help. Seymour thanked her for agreeing, but insisted that she ask for whatever she wanted in return, explaining that he would feel more at ease if he could fulfill his promise. Louina thought for a moment and then seemed to have an idea. Meanwhile, Dante was hiding and observing from a distance, wondering what his uncle was talking about with that child in a place like this. Suddenly, he heard her call his name, which shocked and surprised him. Louina, with a kind smile, suggested to the Duke that Dante model with her. Dante was deeply shaken, wondering what on earth this girl was talking about. The scene shifts to Dante's perspective as he sits in the carriage on his way back, recalling that a full year had passed since his last visit to the Duke of Somerset's residence. This was the first time he had returned to the mansion without his parents, and although nothing here had changed, his feelings were completely different, and the reason was that child, Louina. He wondered to himself how he had ended up becoming a model just because of her request. He angrily condemned her for thinking he would agree to such a request. In his view, this girl had not only won the favor of his grandmother, who was known for being hard to please, but now his uncle was even planning to officially register her in the family name. To him, it was as if she were already an old member of the family, and even all the servants in the mansion were very kind to her. Fear gripped his heart as he wondered if she would really replace him, and if he would be completely abandoned again, just as his nanny had told him. The memory flashed back to many years ago, when he chased after his departing nanny, begging her not to leave. He tearfully asked her why she was quitting, asserting that if she left him too, he would be truly alone. But she coldly retorted, asking if he knew why she hadn't left immediately after his parents' death. When he replied that he thought she was worried about him, she scoffed, saying the reason wasn't so trivial. She revealed a cruel truth to him. She had only stayed to extort more money from his uncle, the new Duke of Somerset. This dealt a huge blow to Dante, leaving him standing there in a daze. She told him it was time he knew the truth, and that he should never forget he could be abandoned at any moment. Then she left him alone in the empty hall, asserting that no one would care about a child with neither money nor a guardian. Since then, he had been shrouded in fear, worried that after his parents were gone, he would be left completely alone if his uncle also lost interest in him. For this very reason, he decided he had to perfectly complete the task his uncle had given him to prove his worth. Because his uncle had summoned him to his office and asked for his help to become a spokesperson for the White Rose brand alongside Louina. Although his uncle told him it might be a burden and that he was free to refuse, Dante saw it as an opportunity, especially since his uncle had also suggested he go see Louina. He saw it as a chance to prove that he was the one the family needed, so he agreed immediately. He pleaded with his uncle to let him do it, asserting that he would prove himself worthy of the heir's position. Seymour smiled, thanked him, and said he was counting on him. Dante felt very proud and responded enthusiastically. But now, after seeing how easily Louina won everyone's favor, he began to doubt if he could do the same. But he quickly gathered his courage in the carriage, deciding not to worry too much and that he must execute this task perfectly. A moment later, a servant announced that the young master had arrived at the photo shoot. The artist, Heir, seemed exceptionally excited, praising Louina, who stood before him holding a bouquet of flowers, asserting that her performance was outstanding. Louina smiled happily upon seeing Dante arrive, while Heir continued to praise her wonderful smile. Louina waved enthusiastically to welcome him, and Dante approached, accompanied by an assistant. Dante watched her enthusiastic welcome and secretly vowed that, no matter the cost, his performance had to be better than hers, and he had to win his uncle's satisfaction. An assistant told him he could change in the next room, and Louina invited him to hurry and join them. But Dante walked away without acknowledging her, which made Louina's smile freeze for a moment as she wondered in confusion if he still disliked her. However, she quickly regained her optimism, thinking that the current situation was still an opportunity for them to get closer, and that time was on their side. After Dante changed his clothes, the two began to stand together. Heir asked them to lean closely together, sharing an umbrella. He directed them into more intimate poses, such as cheek to cheek and holding hands, and expressed his sincere admiration for how cute they looked together. Heir was in a state of extreme excitement, declaring that this was exactly what he wanted and that inspiration was flowing endlessly. After working for a while, they announced a short break. Louina turned to Dante to ask if he was tired, only to be surprised to find that he had disappeared from her side. An assistant told her that Master Dante had gone to the hall first, and Louina thanked him politely. Heir came over and showed her a sketch, pointing out that it was very beautiful and unique, which made her ask curiously if it was true. When she saw the drawing, she noticed that Dante looked handsome in it too, so she asked Heir for permission to take the drawing to show Dante, and he immediately agreed. Louina decided to use the drawing as a conversation starter to try and get closer to him, especially since he had been avoiding her gaze earlier, preventing any real conversation between them. She believed that if they talked while looking at the drawing, their relationship might improve a little. On the way, she accidentally bumped into another girl, which made her stumble, and she immediately apologized. The girl, however, angrily yelled at her, asking what was wrong with her and attacking her for being small and not watching where she was going. Louina tried to apologize again, explaining that she had been distracted, but the girl rudely cut her off, asking if she knew who she was and insisting that she should have watched where she was going. Louina thought to herself how unlucky she was to run into this type of child, common in the orphanage, who always tried to dominate others by raising their voice. The girl then demanded a formal apology. As the girl continued to scream, Louina broke into a brilliant smile, realizing it was easy for her to deal with this kind of child. She cheerfully told the girl that she looked like a dog's paw, which took the girl by complete surprise. The girl was shocked and confused, angrily asking what she was talking about. Louina knew the best way to deal with unreasonable people was to smile and calmly return the insult, so she repeated it again, saying the girl looked like a dog's paw. The girl trembled with rage, repeating Louina's words, then raised her hand to slap her. Louina realized she was about to be hit and squeezed her eyes shut. But before the girl's hand could touch her face, another hand caught it, and a firm voice asked the girl what she thought she was doing. When Louina opened her eyes, she was surprised to see it was Dante who had stopped the girl. Dante sternly questioned the girl if she had really intended to strike. The girl responded rudely and mockingly, asking who he was and asserting that even if she had hit her, what could he do about it? Also claiming that Louina had started the dispute. She yelled in his face that it was none of his business and told him to shut up and mind his own. This made Louina think that the girl had a really bad temper. But Dante didn't back down, telling her that regardless of who started it, Louina was a model here now. He asked her if she was prepared to take full responsibility if anything went wrong with the photo shoot, adding that since he was working with her as a model, It was natural for him to be concerned about her. Louina felt both surprised and happy, because just when she thought Dante hated her, he had stepped up to protect her. Hope ignited in her heart that maybe he didn't hate her that much after all. The girl screamed in anger, demanding to know what was so great about her and how long she had been a model here. Then she started shouting for her father, announcing that she hadn't come alone. Louina scoffed at her behavior, thinking it was pathetic to call for an adult. Just then, her father appeared, anxiously asking his little princess what had happened. The girl threw herself into her father's arms, complaining that they were bullying her. This provoked her father's anger, and he wanted to know who would dare to do such a thing. He rudely asked which family they belonged to be so arrogant and demanded they call their parents immediately. Louina naively replied that they didn't have parents. The man was taken aback and began to observe their clothes, noticing that although it was a brand he had never seen before, it didn't look high-end. He concluded that they were, at best, two orphans being cared for by a minor family. He then continued his insults, saying this was why children raised without parents were hopeless, clearly lacking discipline, and warned them that if they continued like this. Suddenly, he was cut off by a cold and firm voice that finished his sentence for him. They will pay the price for their thoughtless words, just as you are about to. When they turned around, they found Duke Seymour Somerset standing right in front of them. Seymour sharply told him that if he heard correctly, he had just insulted his nephew and a child under his personal care. The man was terrified and tried to argue that he was just trying to discipline the girl, asking in shock if she was really the Duke's niece. Seymour confirmed it and said that made things even more serious, revealing that this girl was a child he had brought in as an heir and asking how he dared to insult the name of Somerset. The man quickly bowed and apologized, admitting his ignorance and that he had made a grave mistake. Just then, the artist Aubert arrived, wondering what all the noise was about. Seymour told him he had come at the right time, as he was just about to head back. He explained to him that Louina and Dante had been insulted by these people, which shocked Aubert. Then Seymour placed a hand on Dante's shoulder and told Aubert that he didn't want to be in the same place as these people any longer, and if he wanted to finish Louina's painting, he would have to sort out this mess himself. They then left. Later, the maid Heir brought Louina some cake, telling her she heard she had been through a terrible situation and asking if she wanted more. Louina happily enjoyed the cake, thinking that if she could get cake every time something like this happened, she was ready to deal with it any time. In another location, Seymour was talking to Dante, telling him that he had heard about how he had protected Louina when she was insulted. He then gently patted his head, praising his good deed and expressing his happiness that he was there. Dante felt embarrassed and mumbled that it was nothing. He had just done what he was supposed to do. Louina returned to eat her cake and noticed Dante's presence, thinking he didn't look as happy as he had a moment ago. When the maid brought Louina more cake, she noticed Dante wasn't eating. Louina wondered if Dante disliked cake, so she offered him a piece, asserting that it was delicious. But he coldly refused, saying he didn't want any and telling her to keep it for herself instead. Louina was disappointed, noticing he had reverted to his usual cold state. When he got up to leave, Louina asked in surprise where he was going, and he sharply replied that it was none of her business. Louina was surprised by his behavior. In her eyes, he had been in a good mood just a few minutes ago. Later, Dante was in his room trying to read, but he couldn't concentrate at all. His memory returned to the moment his uncle had praised him, and he felt ashamed for getting so excited over a simple compliment. He chided himself for this childish happiness, reminding himself that he had only done what he was supposed to do. The scene of his nanny leaving was still vivid in his mind, which strengthened his conviction. He couldn't act like a child. For this reason, he decided not to be swayed by emotions and to remain calm and obedient as usual. His thoughts were interrupted by Louina, who suddenly entered the room. She called his name, and he asked in surprise what she was doing here. She said she knew she would find him here. She explained that she had brought him cake because he hadn't been able to eat dinner due to what had happened earlier. Although she remembered his earlier refusal, she thought he might be hungry. This made him wonder in surprise if she had come all this way just for this. But he refused again, so Louina insisted he try it because it was really delicious. She tried to persuade him to take a bite, but he suddenly exploded, pushing the plate away and shouting that he didn't want it. Then he faced her angrily, thinking that these things were for little kids, and if he was to be the heir, he couldn't be treated like a child. He added painfully that it must be nice for her. He continued to scream that she could act spoiled and throw tantrums because everyone loved her, but he was completely different from her, because he could be kicked out at any moment. Louina calmly asked him why he thought the Duke would abandon him. This took him by surprise. Then she gently wiped away his tears and assured him that the Duke would never abandon him. Dante asked how she could possibly know, so she replied with a confident smile that she was the proof. He was confused, so she explained to him that she had joined the Somerset family to marry him and to make him the next Duke of Somerset. This left Dante utterly shocked, and he asked doubtfully if Louina was his intended fiancée. Dante asked if she was here just to secure his position as heir, and she confirmed it, telling him that his uncle also knew about it and approved. He continued to press, wanting to know why she would give the position to him when she could have taken it for herself. Louina thought to herself that her real goal wasn't the title, but the cure for the Lily disease. But she couldn't tell him that, so she simply replied that she was doing it because she wanted a family, which left him speechless. Louina admitted that she had always been lonely and that she only longed for someone to need her. She confirmed with a sincere smile that she didn't care about the title or the inheritance. All she needed was a family to stand by her side. Dante realized that Louina, this child, was just like him. She was also afraid of being alone. Louina apologized to him for suddenly saying these unplanned things, admitting it might seem abrupt and hard to believe. But Dante surprised her by saying that he believed her. He believed what she said about wanting a family. Louina couldn't contain her joy, grabbing his hand and thanking him for trusting her. Then she moved closer to him and told him that since they were going to get married, they had to strictly adhere to the principle of never betraying each other. Dante asked seriously if she was really on his side, and she enthusiastically confirmed it. She added that he must also be on her side, and that she needed him by her side from now until forever. Dante hesitated for a moment, then asked her to promise she would keep her word. She replied with a radiant smile, confirming her promise. Then she hooked his pinky finger with hers, making a pinky promise and sealing it with a stamp. Later, they sat together in the kitchen eating snacks. Dante asked her if this was the reason she snuck into the kitchen, and she happily replied that the food here was indeed delicious. He then asked her to keep what happened today a secret between them, and she immediately agreed. When he noticed she was carrying a basket of cakes, he asked if she was planning to eat them all. She told him the cakes were for someone else, and that she was on her way to give them to the Duke. Sure enough, she went to Seymour's office and presented the cakes to him as a special delivery. Seymour looked at her wearily, noticing she wasn't in bed yet. She said she saw he was working late again and insisted he at least have a snack. She reminded him that it was almost bedtime, and if he didn't finish his work soon, she wouldn't have time to read him a bedtime story. Seymour told her he was almost done and that she could come in and wait while eating cake, which made her very happy. He then returned to his meeting, telling his assistants to continue the conversation and asking about the identity of the model, Donna Devon. Louina realized they were talking about the dog's paw girl she had met earlier. Derek explained that Miss Donna Devon was originally scheduled to be the spokesperson for the Mortier Company's new brand, and they had intended to keep it a secret, but their secret was exposed because of the conflict with Louina. The Duke asked for the name of the new brand, and Derek told him it was Eden, which was the real cause for concern. Although the Mortier Company was an established player in the clothing industry, their new brand's concept, target audience, and even launch date were a perfect match for their own brand. Derek expressed his concern, believing that as newcomers to the market, they didn't stand a chance, and suggested postponing the launch date. But Seymour flatly rejected the idea, asserting that contracts had already been signed and they couldn't afford any delays at this stage. When Derek suggested changing the designs, Seymour refused that as well, explaining that they lacked the budget for increased marketing and that changing the designs now would mean throwing away all their inventory. Louina listened from the side, realizing the situation had become very tricky. She thought to herself that if they had just mentioned the name Eden, then this was the turning point in Seymour's confrontation with the original male lead of the novel. She remembered what Seymour had said to Valentine Mortier in the novel, accusing him of interfering with his path at every turn, and how nothing had gone right since Eden appeared. Valentine Mortier was the head of the Mortier family, a longtime rival of the Somerset family, and more importantly, the true male lead of the original novel, the withered white lily. This event was only briefly mentioned in the book, but their fateful relationship began precisely with the Eden brand. Unlike Seymour, who was starting from scratch, Valentine's Eden brand was built on his existing fashion empire. With his business experience and unique designs, he successfully won the favor of the Empress, which caused a huge sensation among noble women and young ladies. Therefore, under normal circumstances, Seymour's new project was doomed to fail. But Louina believed this time was different because she was here. Although she had successfully secured the photo shoot with Mr. Aubert, she realized she couldn't relax yet. The photos were great, but it wasn't enough. She needed a surefire way to prevent the collapse of Seymour's brand. She started urging herself to think, realizing she needed something more effective than photos. If she couldn't find a quick solution, Seymour's business would fail again. He would end up deep in debt and live forever like a workaholic zombie. Even worse, she would never get the treatment medicine. This was something she would absolutely not allow to happen. Her deep thoughts were interrupted by a shout, as one of Aubert's assistants was scolding a boy, accusing him of touching his paintings in the studio. The boy argued that he just wanted to take a look, but the assistant mocked him, accusing him of trying to steal something. The boy vehemently denied it. Louina observed the situation from a distance, thinking how they could accuse someone without any proof and how childish these adults were behaving. So she decided to intervene and help the boy who seemed to be in trouble. She walked up to the assistants, asked if they were Mr. Aubert's assistants, and then told them that Mr. Aubert was very angry right now. They were stunned and asked who she was, so she told them they should hurry and go see him. The two assistants ran off in a panic, while Louina silently apologized to Mr. Aubert in her heart for dragging him into this. After they left, she walked over to the boy and asked if he was okay. He hesitantly thanked her. The boy recognized her as the model from the stage, so she asked if he worked here, and he replied that he was just a common handyman. Louina noticed a drawing on the floor and asked if it was his. She bent down to pick it up, and he replied that he had drawn it, but it was nothing special, and tried to hide the drawing. But she saw it anyway and asked if he was a painter. He denied it awkwardly, but admitted that he hoped to become one someday. Louina's face instantly filled with hope, and she told him that she believed she could help him, and that she had found a way to defeat Valentine's brand. The boy's face showed confusion. Louina showed him the drawing and asked if he had drawn her. He answered in the affirmative, explaining that he had made a quick sketch during his break. Louina was deeply impressed by how well it was drawn, and the boy thanked her shyly. Then she looked at the drawing again and realized something important. Of all the clothes he could have drawn, he had drawn her in her sleepwear, something she hadn't thought of before because she wore it every day. This sleepwear, or more accurately, the chemise dress used as underwear or a nightgown, was the very item that would cause a huge sensation in the fashion world a few years later and become a popular style under the name slip dress. People were already getting tired of sparkling gowns and were looking for natural patterns, so nothing could be more suitable for the current trend. Since this was just a preview of an already established trend, Seymour would lose nothing. On the contrary, he would gain the image of a pioneer of the natural style in the fashion world. She realized it was a perfect plan. Moreover, this drawing skill he had drawn her during a short break meant his hand was also very fast. Louina asked for his name, and he shyly replied that his name was David. Louina was shocked. She suddenly realized where this amazing talent and extraordinary aesthetic sense came from. She was sure it was him, the handsome genius painter who would burst onto the art scene like a comet a few years later, David Janea. She remembered that he was famous for only drawing in black and white, which fit her idea perfectly. Chemise dresses were mostly white anyway, so color wasn't essential. Her thoughts were interrupted by David, who anxiously asked if she was all right. So she told him she had just been lost in thought. Louina thought that with such skill, it was a real shame for him to be just a common handyman and not even a painter's assistant. Although she knew he would eventually become famous, she felt it was too much of a pity to let such talent go to waste, so she decided to help him. She asked if he had said he wanted to be a painter, and he answered in the affirmative. So she enthusiastically asked him if he would be willing to do it if someone invited him. But he replied despairingly, wondering who would ever hire him. She enthusiastically replied that she was the one who would hire him, and since she would be providing support, it would be best for her to sponsor him. She asked him to come with her with a brilliant smile. Subsequently, in Seymour's office, Louina presented her idea to him, suggesting the use of black and white booklets to promote the chemise dresses. David agreed, but was afraid in his heart that the Duke would refuse. Derek not only didn't think the idea was bad, but described it as absolutely perfect. He continued enthusiastically that the idea would attract attention and cause a sensation, and although the slip dress seemed very bold, the most important thing right now was to gain attention for a new brand. The most important thing was to establish the brand name in people's minds, even if it just prompted them to enter the store once. He excitedly added that the noble women who came to buy gowns would surely not hesitate to buy a nightgown as well. The sales of chemise dresses were guaranteed. Derek excitedly hugged Louina, praised her as a genius, and asked for the Duke's opinion. Axel replied that while it was risky, they were already in an all-out battle, and even if the chances of success were slim, it was better to try than to do nothing. Seymour approved the plan and ordered them to proceed. He entrusted the design to David and focused his energy on the brochure. Then he ordered David to add the project to the list of Somerset-sponsored projects, and David immediately agreed. Seymour's White Rose brand was an overwhelming success from the very beginning. The ladies of high society became curious about the new white rose dress, the so-called sleep dress. The brochure was the reason the news spread, and although some found it embarrassing and shameful, wondering how underwear could be worn outside, the whispers of conservative aristocrats only increased the brand's fame. That black and white drawing made the girl in the photo look even more pure and innocent, and everyone vied to comment on the idea of launching a chemise-style dress as a regular gown. Because of this, no other brand could compete with the sensation White Rose had caused. As a result, the Mortier company felt threatened and began publishing negative articles about White Rose, accusing it of facing repeated quality complaints. When Axel asked Seymour what to do, he calmly ordered Axel to conduct an immediate quality check. By effectively responding to the accusations, they proved that White Rose garments were of the highest quality. Finally, when the Countess of Queensberry, a famous socialite known for promoting tea parties and picnics in high society, began wearing a sleep dress to her private tea parties, the chemise-style dress officially became a trend and achieved an overwhelming success. Since the launch of White Rose, Louina had been living in unparalleled happiness. Every servant in the mansion was eager to see and dote on her, welcoming the clever young lady. Louina was at a stationery store with a maid, picking out colored pens. Meanwhile, two girls watched her from a distance, whispering that it was indeed Louina. Curious about their whispering, Louina asked what was going on. The two girls excitedly approached her, declaring that she was the girl from the advertising brochure and exclaiming how cute she was. The maid whispered to Louina that they had recognized her from the brochure. From then on, she received compliments wherever she went, and even her relationship with Dante improved a lot. One day, while she was studying, she confessed to him that she didn't understand a problem, so he offered to teach her, and they began studying together. Louina was ecstatic, believing that at this rate, nothing would frustrate the Duke. Therefore, she could get her treatment sooner, and her escape from her inevitable fate was just around the corner. She headed to the Duke's office, expecting him to be in a great mood now, imagining he would thank her for all this, perhaps praise her as he did Axel and Derek, and then she could get her treatment right away. When she arrived, she noticed the door was ajar. She peeked inside, expecting to see his happy smile, but she was surprised to find he had a guest. When she saw Seymour's face, she was shocked, as he looked even worse than before. Confusion overtook her as she wondered what on earth had gone wrong. Far from being happy, his expression was worse than when she first met him, and she felt this shouldn't be happening. She panicked, wondering what had happened in her absence. Suddenly, Seymour called her name, telling her to come in and not to linger outside, so she realized she had been caught. When she went inside, the guest asked if she was the rumored little girl, and Axel replied that she was the face of White Rose. Louina smiled, introduced herself, and asked who the man was. He replied that his name was Jaden Dormer, a name she found familiar. Axel told her that the gentleman was their company's vice president, and it was then that Louina suddenly remembered he was the person briefly mentioned in the novel The Withered White Lily. He was the scammer who had run off with Seymour's company funds. Louina contemplated the situation, wondering how the vice president could be the scammer who absconded with the money. It was the perfect position to run off with the money, and she concluded that this was the reason for the Duke's bad mood. Just then, Jaden asked to leave due to the young lady's arrival and asked the Duke to review the documents he had submitted. Louina secretly pondered the nature of these documents, concluding they must have brought bad news since they came from a bad person. Because of this, the Duke looked very depressed, and she was filled with curiosity about what was written inside. As she tried to sneak a peek, she caught the name Quentin Graham and wondered if it was the name of the Duke's late older brother. Panic set in as she wondered why his name would appear here. So she tried to get closer, but Seymour stopped her, telling her these were not for a child to see and that he had no time to play with her today. Then he told her to come back at bedtime, as she found herself being ushered out of the office. Standing outside the door, she thought there must be something in those papers that was bothering the Duke and wondered what it could be. But he told her to come back at bedtime, so she decided she had no choice but to use that method. She burst into Dante's room, startling him. She enthusiastically asked if he was on her side, and he was taken aback by her sudden question. He assured her that of course he was on her side, but wondered why she was asking, so she asked for his help. Late that night, Seymour sat in his office contemplating the documents, thinking about the amount of debt Quentin owed to Somerset. Quentin Graham was his older brother and Dante's father, and he had been a truly kind person. He remembered Quentin always worrying about him, urging him to enjoy his time more instead of always thinking about work. He was a gentle person who always smiled, even when Seymour spoke bluntly and supported whatever he did, though he worried he would overwork himself. But who knew that such a secret was hidden behind that smile? After Quentin's death, the huge debts he had accumulated were revealed, as he had been running several companies for a long time. But due to a sudden withdrawal of investors, his businesses failed one after another, and Seymour inherited all these debts along with the Graham title. Seymour thought such a large debt must have started a long time ago, and wondered why his brother had said nothing before things got so bad. He wondered how a family head could be so irresponsible, then felt sorry for judging a dead man like that. Although he believed he could manage to handle the debt, he didn't know how he would explain these things about his father to Dante. He sighed deeply, realizing that on days like this, he couldn't help but think of someone he missed. He recalled the memory of his late wife, Rose. His thoughts were interrupted by Louina calling his name, as she had come to him at bedtime. Seymour looked at her in surprise. She was holding a book and told him with a bright smile that it was bedtime. Seymour remembered his promise, and she told him she would enjoy this fairy tale book. As Seymour and Louina left the room together, he warned her not to hide cake and eat it secretly, which made her realize he had found out, but she quickly replied that she hadn't hidden any cake today. Louina chuckled to herself, clarifying that she wasn't referring to cake anyway. The Duke then warned her to be careful on the stairs. In his room, Dante was trying to copy the documents, wondering in confusion why he was doing this. It went back to 4 hours ago, when Dante was still puzzled by Louina's request. She asked if he wanted to help her steal his uncle's documents, and enthusiastically replied to him that this was exactly what she meant. She explained to him that it wasn't difficult, and all he had to do was steal them, make a copy, and put them back. She thought that even if they couldn't take the originals, there would be no problem as long as they were copied accurately. If they studied the documents, they could find out the reason for the Duke's depression and even stop the bad guy's plan. She asked if he would help her, but Dante flatly refused. He told her to do it herself if she wanted to and not to involve him in it. Louina was shocked by his flat refusal, as she thought their relationship had become close enough for him to at least consider it. Meanwhile, Dante wondered to himself if he had been too harsh on her, but he quickly dismissed the thought, insisting that wrong was wrong. He tried to tell her not to take it to heart, and that she shouldn't recklessly interfere in adult affairs. But she suddenly burst into tears and pleaded, throwing herself on the floor and screaming that she didn't care, and he had to do this for her. Dante was horrified by her actions and told her to get up, but she refused, claiming he was good at writing quickly while her handwriting was terrible. She added that it was only a few pages, they wouldn't get caught, and pleaded with him to help her. Although he told her her attempt was futile, she continued to use childish tricks, reminding him that he had said he was on her side, and now he was abandoning her, and that the documents had piqued his curiosity too. Finally, Dante relented and agreed to help her on the condition that she got up, much to her delight. She told him she hadn't seen the details, but she had seen a name on the documents. It was the name of Quentin Graham. Dante asked if that was his father's name, and if she was sure she saw it, which she affirmed. Dante was confused, wondering how there could be documents with his father's name when he had been told his father died suddenly in an accident without even leaving a will. Louina asked if he didn't believe her, and after a moment of hesitation, he replied that he would help her, which made her praise him as the best. Back in the present, Dante had finished copying the documents and remembered how his uncle had scolded him and read him a boring fairy tale. He then met Louina under the covers and told her he had copied everything and it wasn't as hard as she had expected. Louina began to read the copied documents aloud. When she didn't understand some of the words, Dante offered to read them to her, and she insisted he read them aloud. He explained to her that the documents were basically records of an investigation into the amount of inheritance inherited by family members belonging to other families. In short, the document stated that Quentin had researched inheritance law 2 weeks before his death in an accident, specifically how much of the Somerset family's inheritance would go to Seymour and under what circumstances those rights could not be claimed. At the time, their father, the former Duke of Somerset, was suffering from an illness, and Quentin was heavily in debt from a series of failed businesses. Quentin's actions could be interpreted in 2 ways. Either he wanted to find out how much inheritance he would receive if the Duke died, or he was looking for a way to claim Seymour's inheritance for himself. Louina realized this was the reason for the Duke's worsening mood. She remembered that even in the original story, Seymour hated Quentin so much that he was repeatedly depicted as hating Dante simply because he was Quentin's son. But now, before the start of the original story, their relationship didn't seem to be this bad. She wondered what had gone wrong between them before the story began, and concluded that Seymour's core problem might not have been resolved until he met the heroine. For now, these documents seemed to be the most likely cause, and Jaden had deliberately given them to him to sow seeds of distrust within the family, isolate them, and ruin the company. Louina decided she would not let Jaden's plan succeed and would protect the Duke and Dante no matter what it took. She asked Dante if these were all the documents, and he gave an affirmative answer. Louina noticed Dante's expression had turned grim and suddenly realized she had done nothing less than tell him his father was plotting something terrible. She felt regretful, and if she had known the contents of the documents earlier, she would not have asked for his help in the first place, and wondered what to do now. But Dante told her not to worry, and that if his father had made a mistake, it was nothing to be comforted about, and as his son, he had to bear that responsibility. Louina was moved by his words, but whispered that it was still painful. He replied that even if it was painful, if he became the heir, his father's mistakes would become his responsibility. Louina felt sorry for him, and although he was still a child, she wished he wouldn't pressure himself like this. She decided to tell him a secret. So she told him that the person who brought these documents was a really bad person, which meant the documents could be fake, although she also admitted they could be real. She didn't want him to be in too much pain, which brought a smile to her face. He then reminded her of the promise she had made with him, that from now on they would be on the same side. She gave an affirmative answer, but wondered why he was suddenly bringing this up. So he took her hand and made a promise to her. Louina thought to herself that she hoped Dante wouldn't be in too much pain, as he was her first friend in this novel, and she genuinely wanted to help him, and decided to uncover the truth for his sake as well. Later, Seymour asked Jaden about the matter he had asked him to investigate. The other party clarified that his secretary was right, and he had been Quentin's attendant secretary. Since his words sounded suspicious, he had conducted an investigation and presented the results to Seymour. As Seymour read the report, he was shocked by what he found. It was a promissory note from the Hayworth family with Quentin's and Rose's signatures. Seymour was shocked, wondering how Quentin could have borrowed money from Rose, and if they were really that close. He was sure they had no dealings with each other. Jaden saw that his plan to deceive the Duke was succeeding and gave an evil smile. The death certificate had Quentin's and Rose's signatures, but Seymour was certain they had never met privately. This meant the document was proof that Rose had met his older brother Quentin without his knowledge. What was worse was that the debt was not borrowed in Rose's name, but in the name of the Hayworth family. This made the debt a family debt rather than a personal one, and it would not be easily discovered unless someone deliberately investigated. The deeper Seymour dug, the clearer it became. Rose had been deceiving him. He had buried himself in work and hadn't realized it for a whole year, even though it should have been revealed long ago. Seymour found the whole situation utterly absurd. He thought about how he had come to suspect a romantic relationship between his long-dead wife and brother. Then he said that no conclusion could be drawn from this level of evidence alone. So Seymour ordered Jaden to make sure his secretary kept his mouth shut and not to talk nonsense. Jaden agreed and left, promising to inform him if he found any new information. Before leaving, he asked Seymour not to worry too much. Outside, his deputy met him and asked if he was done talking with the president, to which he gave an affirmative answer. His deputy wished him a safe journey. But after he left, Jaden muttered to himself, commenting that Seymour was a fool. Jaden Dormer was originally an executive at a logistics company on the verge of bankruptcy. After the Hayworth family acquired the company, he got lucky and rose through the ranks until he reached the position of vice president. While some might see him as a success in life, the reality was quite different. Due to his wild addiction to gambling, he was saddled with huge debts. One day, when creditors came after him at his home, he decided to hide out at the company for a while. He thought things weren't too bad yet, and he just needed to hold out for a few days. Although he felt sorry for Seymour Somerset, he thought he had no other choice if he wanted to live, and the company would be his in a few days anyway. He had come up with this plan only a few months ago and hadn't expected things to go so smoothly. But now that he was deep in debt, he had used company funds for a big gamble. Just then, his new secretary told him the new secretary had arrived, so he ordered him to come in. The new secretary introduced himself as Peter. Peter asked if the president frequented this salon, and Jaden replied that he did sometimes. Peter then told him that the person he used to serve often held secret meetings here and asked about his work experience. He replied that he used to serve as the attendant secretary to Duke Quentin of the Somerset Duchy, which made Jaden realize that this new secretary, who had joined by chance, knew secrets of the Somerset family. He thought that an executive's family affairs and love life were the perfect material for a character assassination, and if Seymour damaged the company's image, he would soon be fired. If he could topple Seymour, who had been mentally unstable since the accident, Jaden thought it would be natural for him, as the vice president, to replace him, and his plan was a great success. He scoffed at Seymour for trembling over a few documents. He believed that even if Seymour's condition had slightly improved due to the success of White Rose, it was only a matter of time before family problems crush him again and mockingly encourage him to doubt his dead family more. Rumors spread in the mansion that the president was secretly meeting a married woman in Bailey Harbor and that more than one person had seen him there. Some wondered about this, as the president didn't seem like that kind of person, but others added that the meeting place was a salon used by the rich for secret rendezvous. Then they revealed that the woman in question was Mrs. Winslet, the famous beautiful actress who had married a prominent businessman 3 years ago. The chatter continued excitedly, with some condemning how he could see another woman just a year after his beloved wife's death, and that he had chosen an actress over a noble lady. Jaden interrupted them with a sharp question, asking what they were talking about, thinking that at this rate, Seymour's reputation among the executives would soon collapse. The speakers were alarmed by the vice president's appearance, so Jaden used the situation to comment that the president had a discerning eye, but he should be more careful, and that if he leaked a little information at this stage, it would be enough to confirm these rumors. Jaden was delighted that the rumors were spreading so quickly, realizing that nothing spread more easily and was more exciting than a manager's private life at work. He could let them go on. Then he ordered them to get back to work, but he suddenly heard a child's voice. It was Louina, who had appeared out of nowhere, asking if the ladies also knew Mrs. Winslet. Jaden wondered in confusion where this child had come from. Louina told them that Mrs. Winslet was her teacher and that she was glad she had come, or else a great disaster would have occurred. She added that she had insisted on visiting the company and condemned the spread of these nasty rumors about the Duke. Louina thought to herself that Jaden had really fallen into a trap today, and as long as she was present, things would not go his way. The employees wondered about the child's identity, so one of them remembered she was Louina Whitfield, the model for White Rose, and another added that she was the one the Duke had recently adopted and was raising as an heir, which Louina happily confirmed. One of the ladies asked if Mrs. Winslet was really her teacher, so she enthusiastically replied that the Duke had personally asked her to be her teacher and that she was a wonderful and very beautiful person. When asked if the Duke had personally asked her, she denied it, explaining that someone else had recommended her, and Mrs. Winsley had considered it for a long time after receiving a letter from the Duke before deciding to become her teacher. She continued to talk enthusiastically, explaining that the last time she wanted to see the city center, the Duke had recommended a quiet place, because Mrs. Winslet would get tired from being recognized by so many people, and unfortunately the Duke was too busy with work, so she had gone with his nephew, Dante. The ladies wondered how what they had heard was completely different and wondered how these rumors had started. They agreed that he couldn't possibly have held a secret meeting with a child present. Jaden approached Louina and sternly asked what she was doing, pointing out that everything beyond this was an internal matter of the Somerset family. He added that he believed saying anything more would put the Duke in a difficult position, and that regardless of whether she was the model for the company's brand, she could not recklessly enter the company. Jaden thought to himself that if he wasn't careful, his plan would collapse, and he couldn't let her ruin his work after things had been going so well, so he asked her to leave. He then shouted at everyone to go back inside, as the office was getting too noisy. Louina looked at him, realizing he was trying to deliberately tarnish the Duke's reputation, and despite her correcting the facts, he was still trying to expel her, so she decided not to leave quietly. She took him by surprise by saying she had a message to deliver to him. He asked in surprise if the message was for him, and she gave an affirmative answer, telling him that someone was looking for him outside. She went on to explain that they were very angry, shouting his name loudly, accusing him of being a scoundrel who didn't even pay interest, and that they looked very scary, which left Jaden in shock. He tried to deny it, but Louina cut him off, insisting she had clearly heard them mention his name. The ladies began to wonder in surprise about the debt collectors and how they could have found their way to the company. Their opinion of the vice president changed, and they began to whisper that they hadn't expected him to be this kind of person. Jaden realized that things were not going as he had planned. Louina took advantage of the situation and urged him to go and see them quickly, pointing out that they were still outside while he was trembling with anger. Just then, as he was shaken by her words, his words lost their power. Louina thought to herself, who would believe a man who couldn't even refute a little girl's words? Confusion appeared on Jaden's face, and he left in a hurry. The ladies began to wonder if his words were just empty rumors, and concluded that a child wouldn't lie, and began to question his conversation. Now that her mission was over, Louina decided to go see the Duke. She set off happily to find him, and wondered where he would be. Then she saw him walking with his assistant, so she called him and ran towards him. So he asked her the reason for her visit to the company. She told him she had come to thank him for personally choosing a teacher for her. She bowed to him in thanks, which impressed his assistant, Axel. Seymour commented that she could have done that at the mansion after work, and he gently patted her head, commenting that she had gone to the trouble of making the trip. She told him that wasn't the only reason she had come. She noticed his skin looked worse than before, so Seymour ordered his assistant, Axel, to prepare some refreshments in an empty room. Louina wondered to herself if Jaden had already done something, so Seymour invited her to go with him and promised to get her some cake. Louina was delighted by the offer and decided to eat first and think later. As she enjoyed the cake, Seymour asked if it was good. With her mouth full of cake, she enthusiastically replied that it was delicious. She thought to herself that this was an energy-boosting cake, and that she had to stay by the Duke's side more at times like this. Louina suddenly asked him not to worry at all, which took him by surprise. She confidently assured him that as long as she was around, there would be no problem no matter what happened in the future. A look of confusion appeared on Seymour's face at this sudden declaration, while Louina continued to promise that she would definitely protect him. She then revealed what seemed to her to be the logical reason, which was that unless he was safe himself, he would not be able to bring her the treatment, which made his assistant, Axel, whisper to the Duke that she seemed to be saying she would eat everything, and Seymour tacitly agreed with him. Later, during her painting class with her teacher, Mrs. Winslet, she was asked to freely draw whatever she liked based on what she had learned in the previous lesson. As she drew, her memory recalled the scary look in Jaden's eyes when he looked at her the day before. She felt a little scared, thinking that the other rumors she had heard at the company must also be related to him. She wondered worriedly how many malicious rumors he had spread, and although she had managed to stop them this time, she didn't know what would happen if things were left to run their course. She realized that if things continued to go Jaden's way, the company would go bankrupt again, and the family's fortune would be completely ruined by Quentin's debts. What was worse, Seymour and Dante's relationship would deteriorate just like in the original story, which would push Seymour to the brink of another breakdown. The mere thought of such a future terrified her, so she resolved that she had to stop Jaden from spreading more rumors. By then, she had finished her painting and was feeling quite pleased with it. Louina proudly showed her painting to her teacher, who praised her work for its precision. The painting depicted a scene of her, Dante, and the Duke together, and she decided she had to show it to the Duke herself, believing it was the only way to personally watch over and protect him. Meanwhile, Jaden was furiously pounding his fist on his desk, wondering just who this girl who had ruined his plans was. Thanks to her, rumors were now circulating everywhere that he was being pursued by debt collectors. He swore to bring her down along with Seymour for daring to interfere with his plans. Ever since that girl started showing up at the office, nothing had gone his way. After he had gone to great lengths to spread rumors about Seymour, she had managed to draw all the attention to herself. She was well loved by the employees because she often brought them cake, and the employees would kindly ask her to bring some to the president as well. Because of her liveliness, Seymour's reputation among the employees began to improve, as everyone concluded he must be gentle with her. And so, while Seymour's reputation improved, Jaden was getting beaten up by debt collectors in front of the company building. He recalled how he had been humiliated and beaten, and how they had warned him that this was the last time, and that next time he had to bring the full amount, or else. Jaden realized he couldn't delay any longer. He had to get the funds by next week, no matter the cost. If his initial plan had gone smoothly, he could have embezzled funds amidst the chaos. But everything had become a mess because of that girl who treated the office like her own backyard and constantly thwarted his plans. Now that rumors of his debt had spread, he would be the first to be suspected if company funds went missing. So he needed a clever plan to embezzle the cash without drawing suspicion to himself. And that's when he realized it didn't necessarily have to be him who took the money. He smiled sinisterly. He had finally found the solution: to frame Seymour. He already had a forged ledger prepared in advance, which was his fallback plan after a major embezzlement, and there was no better bait to divert everyone's attention. Although his situation was precarious due to the creditors and rumors, everyone knew Seymour was in a tight spot because of his brother Quentin's debts, making him the perfect target for an accusation. Jaden decided that since he was going to lose one way or another, he might as well take a gamble. His plan was to leak the forged, suspicious ledger to the company. In his view, the executives, who usually turned a blind eye to employee gossip, would suspect Seymour before they suspected him. This way, if things went according to plan, he could overthrow Seymour without getting his own hands dirty. As he prepared to leave, he called his secretary, Peter, and told him he was going to the bank. Then he gave him a secret task: to burn the blue-covered book on his desk, stressing that he should leave no trace as it was a confidential document. Peter accepted the order, but hesitated when asking about a previously assigned task, only for Jaden to yell at him furiously, scolding him for his stupidity and demanding he finish the first task before dealing with this one, ordering him to just get it done. So Peter responded immediately. After Jaden left in a rage, Peter thought his master wouldn't be back for a while, so he decided to finish organizing his own documents first and deal with the book in the evening. As he was walking, Louina suddenly bumped into him, hurting her forehead. She immediately apologized and explained that she was lost. Peter kindly asked why she was here, comforting her and checking her forehead, telling her that the Duke was currently away on business. Louina excitedly told him she wanted to show him her painting, so Peter suggested she leave it in his office as a surprise, which made Louina very happy. Peter guided her to the Duke's office, located at the end of the hallway. After she thanked him and hurried off, he wished her a safe arrival, but he paused to think about the notebook she was holding, feeling that it looked strangely familiar. However, he quickly dismissed the thought, figuring that color was common anyway. Meanwhile, Seymour had returned to the company. He found Louina drawing in the employee office and greeted her happily upon seeing her. Seymour asked what she was doing in the employee office, and she replied that she was drawing quietly so as not to disturb anyone. And of course, she was also there to make sure no bad rumors were spreading about him. She then excitedly asked if he had seen her wonderful painting, insisting she had left it on his desk. But Seymour asked what she was talking about, confused, which made her realize he hadn't seen it. She explained to him that she had placed her sketchbook next to a notebook that looked exactly like it. At this point, his assistant Axel intervened and explained that it seemed she had gone into the wrong room. He added that CEO Seymour always kept his door closed, and she must have mistakenly entered the vice president's office next door. This left Louina shocked and horrified. Panic enveloped her as she realized she had left her notebook in the office of the man she despised, especially since she had written many bad things about him in it. So she announced she was going to get it back immediately. Seymour allowed her to go, reminding her not to fall. Louina ran to the office, peeked inside to find no one there, and breathed a sigh of relief. She quickly went in, determined to grab her notebook and leave. Sure enough, she found it on the desk and felt relieved that he hadn't seen it yet. As she was leaving, Axel called out to her, telling her they were heading back to the palace if she didn't hurry, so she rushed to catch up with them. In her haste, she yelled for them not to leave her behind and dashed after the Duke. But she had left a blue notebook on the desk. A moment later, Peter entered the empty office and found the notebook, wondering in confusion if this was the document that was supposed to be destroyed. Peter grabbed the blue-covered book, and a strange feeling came over him that he had seen it somewhere before, but he quickly dismissed it, thinking it was none of his business. That evening at the Somerset mansion, Seymour was walking with Louina and his assistant when he asked if she had brought the painting she wanted to show him, to which she excitedly replied that she had just brought it and would show him right away. She proudly added that her teacher, Miss Winslet, had praised the painting highly and that she had originally intended it as a surprise for him. Then, with a brilliant smile, she handed him the open book, asking for his opinion. But inside wasn't a painting, but pages filled with numbers, looking like a ledger. Seymour and his assistant looked at the unexpected contents of the book with expressions of surprise. Louina's smile vanished, replaced by utter confusion. She had thought she was showing him the portrait she had drawn, and was shocked by what she saw. She realized in horror that this wasn't her school notebook at all. Seymour calmly asked where she had gotten it, and she sheepishly replied that she had taken it from the vice president's office, explaining that there was another notebook there identical to her sketchbook, and she must have mixed them up, leaving her own notebook behind. In its place, an expression of realization and determination appeared on Seymour's face. He then called his assistant, Axel, and told him it was time to move forward with that matter. Sometime later, a ledger was revealed, showing that Seymour had embezzled investment funds. The matter caused a huge uproar at a board meeting, with one director wondering how such a thing could happen, while another expressed his dissatisfaction, believing this was exactly what he had feared would happen after a nobleman acquired the company. The anger of one of the directors grew as he wondered if the nobility even saw them as human and demanded the election of a new, qualified person to take over this opportunity. Jaden watched all this with a triumphant smile, thinking how pathetic it was that Seymour was too shocked to speak or offer any rebuttal, and secretly wondered what he would do now. Then another director stood up, demanding an answer from Seymour and asking if he had really embezzled the funds. Seymour remained calm and denied doing such a thing. But the director immediately confronted him with a blue ledger, asking what this piece of evidence meant. He explained that the notebook clearly showed large sums of money withdrawn in the name of the Duke of Somerset, and mockingly asked how they could believe him in the face of such conclusive evidence, wondering if the records had appeared out of thin air. Seymour looked at him contemptuously, thinking how insolent it was to corner him with such flimsy evidence, and then ordered him to shut up before he ripped his mouth apart. The director was stunned into silence, and the tense room fell quiet. Seymour looked at the attendees, thinking sarcastically what a wonderful world it was where people like these scoundrels could call themselves executives and walk with their heads held high. When one of them objected that he was being too harsh, Seymour replied that what was truly harsh was their level of intelligence, and asked if they really believed that someone like him, the head of both the Somerset and Haworth families, would have any reason to embezzle company funds. He continued his reprimand, expressing regret that he had trusted and entrusted work to these idiots until now, wondering if they thought a person of his stature would desperately embezzle company funds for a mere pittance. His powerful words began to sway the attendees, who started exchanging hesitant glances, with one admitting that the evidence was indeed weak, especially since the notebook was the only proof. A woman agreed, adding that considering how much effort Seymour had put into saving the company, it was impossible for him to do such a thing. Jaden grew nervous as he saw the atmosphere turning against him and realized that if things continued this way, he would be dragged into the mess. He had to find a way to regain control. He slammed his fist on the table and yelled in Seymour's face, telling him to stop this pointless sophistry, wondering if there wasn't already clear evidence, and that if he couldn't explain the evidence properly, his words were meaningless. He added that if he couldn't prove his claims, then his word were nothing but sophistry. This made Jaden smile sinisterly and ask the others how they could trust and follow a swindler who was only good at sweet-talking. He asked if he was right, and the directors began to whisper among themselves, agreeing that the evidence had indeed been presented. Jaden smiled confidently, thinking he had already disposed of the real ledger and wondering what else Seymour could do. Seymour seemed unfazed, calmly saying that if that was the case, then there was nothing to be done, and then ordered someone to come in. Louina entered the meeting room, causing confusion among the directors, who wondered about the child's identity. But Jaden recognized her immediately, furiously thinking why she was here. A director then clarified that she was Miss Louina, the White Rose model. Seymour confirmed her identity, then placed a hand on her shoulder and asked her to come forward and tell everyone what she knew. Louina began to recount what had happened, explaining that she had accidentally left her sketchbook in the vice president's room, and that when she went back to get it, she made a mistake and took another book from his room instead of her notebook. But she corrected herself, announcing that what she had brought was not just a book, but the real ledger. This shocked the attendees, who wondered in amazement how there could be two sets of books. Jaden fell into a panic, wondering how the real notebook could be here, as he was sure he had ordered his secretary, Peter, to dispose of it. He then began to doubt the authenticity of the notebook he had submitted as evidence. Seymour explained that after examining both notebooks, it was found that the records were identical up to a certain point, but unlike Jaden's, this notebook contained no record of embezzled investment funds. He then asked Louina again where she had gotten it from. Louina confirmed she had taken it from the vice president's room, which made one director note the irony. Wasn't the vice president the one who initially brought up the case? He pressed on, wondering why another ledger was found in his room and demanding an immediate explanation from Jaden. The scene flashed back to a few days earlier, with Seymour revealing to Louina that she was right, and that the ledger that was supposed to be in the safe was indeed in the vice president's office. Axel told her that her suspicions were correct, as he had already suspected the vice president of embezzling company funds bit by bit, but couldn't catch him due to a lack of solid evidence. He concluded that Jaden must be up to something, as he was secretly hiding the ledger. Seymour comforted a worried Louina, telling her she had done nothing wrong and patting her head, explaining that it was fortunate he had seen the notebook first, or she would have been in big trouble if she had been caught. Seymour thought to himself that the recent rumors about Jaden were concerning, and he must be desperate to hide something like this, predicting that he would soon show his fangs. Back in the present meeting room, Jaden erupted in panic, yelling for them to shut up and denying any knowledge of the matter. He claimed it was all just a conspiracy, that Louina and Seymour were framing him, questioning if there was any proof the notebook came from his room and insisting he had no reason to do such a thing. Seymour remained calm, finding it strange to deny the matter when there was clear evidence, and told his assistant Axel that he hadn't wanted to resort to this, but he had no other choice, ordering him to bring those people in. As Axel opened the door, fear gripped Jaden as he recognized the identity of the newcomers. They were the debt collectors, the ones who had been waiting at the company entrance. Jaden wondered in terror how they had gotten here. One of the directors then explained that the company's atmosphere had been turbulent recently due to the presence of strangers, and it turned out the whole affair was related to the funds Jaden had embezzled. One of the debt collectors began to reveal the truth, explaining that they were there to collect a debt that was months overdue, and Jaden had assured them he could pay it back after today. Another added that Jaden had promised them he could use company checks starting today and had even written them a note. He then showed the note, which clearly bore the name and signature of Jaden Dormer. Seymour calmly commented, explaining that to use a company check, the required signature was not his personal one, but that of the official representative position. And just like that, Jaden was cornered, with Seymour confronting him with the circumstances, the witnesses, and the evidence. The forged ledger meant to frame him and the note, all because of gambling debts he couldn't afford. Seymour declared that it was clear Jaden had intended to overthrow him and seize the position of official representative, then asked if he had anything else to say. Jaden could only stammer out a denial, realizing that any further excuses seemed pointless and that the meeting was over for him. Seymour handed the documents to his assistant, Axel, and told him to handle the rest. As they were leaving, Louina wondered if things were really resolved, and he told her that it was over. They could go. Louina smiled happily, realizing the problem was finally solved. Seymour apologized to Louina for getting her involved in adult matters, but she replied that she was glad she could help him, while Jaden furiously remembered her name. Jaden thought furiously as he faced his fate, vowing not to let them get away easily. According to Assistant Axel's report, after the meeting, the police searched Jaden's home and found other evidence of embezzlement, and he was arrested for embezzlement and fraud. Fortunately, the investment funds embezzled from the Duke were recovered, and Louina believed the matter had ended peacefully for now. In the office, Axel expressed his relief to the Duke that the matter was resolved without major issues and credited Miss Louina with defusing the crisis. Although Seymour agreed, feeling fortunate, Axel noticed his master's expression was still grim and asked if something else was bothering him. Meanwhile, Louina anxiously wondered why there were no signs of Seymour's condition improving. As she was lost in thought, wondering why the Duke was still worried despite Jaden's arrest and the recovery of the funds, Dante suddenly appeared behind her. Dante asked what she was doing, accusing her of eavesdropping outside her uncle's room, which confused her. Louina tried to quiet him down, and Dante explained to her that one shouldn't eavesdrop on adult conversations. But she admitted that this moment was very important, which sparked her concern about being discovered. Dante wondered himself why she said that. Inside the room, Axel was explaining to Seymour that the reason for his concern was the information Jaden had brought about Quentin, which didn't seem to be false. He then wondered if Lord Quentin and Lady Rose truly had some kind of relationship. Louina was shocked to hear this, wondering what on earth the relationship between Quentin and Rose was. A terrifying image of a romantic affair between them, just like what happens in those adult stories, flashed through her mind, frightening her deeply. Dante blamed her for eavesdropping on the adults' conversation. Louina tried to explain to him, but he told her, sadly, that he understood now. He said there was a reason why adults always try to hide things, appearing deeply pained. Louina anxiously asked if he was okay, but he asked her to go back to her room so she wouldn't get hurt anymore. Seeing him in so much pain, Louina grew worried. She was overcome with worry that if the distance between Dante and the Duke continued to grow, everything would go back to square one. Louina threw herself onto her bed in her room, feeling like she had unintentionally caused a huge mess. She scolded herself harshly, realizing this was not the time to get Dante involved. His face had looked so pained, and she realized he must be incredibly sad. The relationship between his late father and his aunt was now being questioned. She concluded that it was no longer enough to just solve Seymour's problem. She had to find something that could help both of them. Louina recalled that the original novel didn't mention much about Rose and Quentin. They were just minor characters in Seymour's past. Suddenly, an idea flashed in her mind, and she realized there was a way to go to Rose's room. In most families, the rooms of deceased nobles would be emptied or repurposed, but the Duke of Somerset's household was an exception. That room had been left completely untouched. She remembered once seeing a servant, Hugo, coming out of Rose's room, and when she asked, he told her it was because Seymour had never mentioned anything about the room. Hugo added that they didn't dare bring up the lady in front of the Duke, as he wasn't ready to hear anything about her, and they hoped that one day, when the Duke was psychologically ready himself, would ask for this door to be closed. Louina realized this was why she had found the glimpse of Rose's room strange at the time. The door was always open, as if the owner had just stepped out, with the furniture neatly arranged and spotless. But some items looked as if someone had just been using them and had left them in a mess, suggesting that Duchess Rose was still living in this house. Louina decided to go in for a quick look and then leave, thinking the door was always open anyway. She thought that even if she said she had wandered in by mistake, she probably wouldn't be severely scolded. In fact, she might be lucky enough to find something important. She was captivated by the beauty of the room. After entering the room, she quickly began searching everywhere, under the bed and on the dressing table, but she found nothing. The only thing she found was a drawer with a rose-shaped lock. She couldn't find the key anywhere in the room, and although her intuition screamed at her to open that drawer, she couldn't see inside. Later, while she was sitting with Lady Hayworth, the lady noticed she looked downcast and asked if something had happened. Louina, preoccupied with the lock, panicked and quickly denied it. The lady explained that, after hearing Mrs. Winslet's report, she had summoned her after a long time to praise her, yet she had been sighing like an old woman the whole time. When the lady noticed she didn't seem to have an appetite, she suggested taking away all the refreshments, which made Louina immediately refuse, insisting she was fine. Lady Hayworth smiled and told her she had heard she had been a great help to Seymour. Louina replied that it was nothing special, so the lady wisely explained to her that a gold coin holds different values for each person who possesses it, and praised her for what she had done. She continued as she trimmed yellow roses, explaining that people also have different values to different people, and what's important is to cut away what must be cut and accept what must be accepted. She added that remembering the past was the same. The first time is always the hardest, but the ability comes from realizing there's no turning back, and once you accept the facts, it becomes easier afterward. At this, Louina asked her if the great lady had also experienced that first time. She answered affirmatively, then asked in return, wasn't it she who had given it to her? Louina was surprised by the question, so the lady told her that it was still difficult for her to understand, but one day she would. To end the heavy conversation, the lady asked her to perform a task, to take a vase of roses and place it in Rose's room. Louina immediately agreed, feeling relieved. The request made her very happy, as it was exactly what she wanted, since she had been planning to check Rose's room while at the Hayworth mansion anyway. After taking her leave, she entered the room Rose had used before coming to Somerset, hoping to find some evidence there. As she was looking for a place to put the vase, she caught a glimpse of a gold key in an unexpected place. She rushed back to Lady Hayworth with the key and asked if she recognized it. Louina asked if she could borrow it for a while, and the lady allowed her to keep it, commenting that children tend to like such things. Louina thanked her joyfully. Hope filled her. Perhaps this key could open that drawer in the Somerset mansion, and the secret of Rose and Quentin might be inside. For this purpose, she called Dante to the room. Dante wondered if this was why he had been summoned, for them to open the drawer together with this key. Louina excitedly confirmed this to him, but his silence and hesitation made her anxiously wonder if this was too much for him to handle. Louina hesitated, thinking that opening the drawer might hurt Dante further for no reason, and decided it would be better to do it alone later. She suggested they go out and play, thinking this would be boring, but Dante flatly refused, surprising her. He explained to her that he wanted to check for himself and discover his father's true character. Louina asked if he was sure, warning him that the contents of the drawer might contain bad things about his father, but he knelt beside her and confirmed he was ready, agreeing. He added that even if what was inside revealed a side of his father he didn't know, he wanted to know the truth. This made Louina finally agree. After they opened the drawer with the key, they found something inside. It was a letter from Quentin to Lady Rose Hayworth. Meanwhile, Seymour was lost in memories in his office, wondering just how many times his name had been changed. The first change was at the will of his father, the former Duke of Somerset. His father was close to the Hayworth family and had made an agreement with the former Marquis of Hayworth. The Duke of Somerset's family had 2 sons, while the Marquis of Hayworth had only 1 daughter. So the agreement stipulated that his second son, Seymour, would marry the Hayworth daughter as a son-in-law, who marries into and takes his wife's family name. Since his older brother was to inherit the title of Duke of Somerset anyway, his father intended to send him to the Hayworth family so that he could gain a title instead of ending up with nothing. Perhaps this was his way of making a decision for his second son's future. But to him, who was just a child at the time, it felt different. He felt abandoned by his father and family. And even after going to Hayworth, he still felt like a stranger, living a life where he belonged nowhere. But it was Rose who ultimately made him settle down and put down roots. She was the one who proposed to him, not because of a family agreement set by the elders, but because she genuinely wanted to be with him. She promised him that she would become a harbor he could return to. She promised to always be by his side until the Hayworth mansion truly became a home for him. It was Rose who took the initiative to ask to marry him. The memory of that day was still clear in his mind. Her warmth, her hands holding his, and the cheerful sound of her voice when she smiled at him. Rose was where he belonged and his reason for living. But now he thought with anguish that Rose had hidden things from him behind his back, and specifically concerning his older brother. He felt he should have followed her to the end of his life and never known about her so-called relationship with Quentin. If he had died after her, perhaps it wouldn't have been so painful. His dark thoughts were interrupted by the sudden appearance of Louina, who came in her pajamas to tell him it was time for bed. She expressed surprise that he was still working, urging him to put his things down and get up, to which he reluctantly responded. As she took his hand and led him away, she chided that if she weren't around, he would surely stay up all night again. He wondered to himself if she realized what she was doing, a faint smile appearing on his face. He noticed that she always appeared right on time whenever he was lost in dark thoughts. Although her frequent visits had annoyed him at first, he had now grown accustomed to this routine, which he found somewhat absurd. In the bedroom, Louina had already prepared the bed and ordered him to lie down immediately. As he lay down, he warned her not to fall asleep while reading like last time. She then gave him her assurance, promising that today's story would surely satisfy him. Seymour lay in bed and smiled, thinking sarcastically that the story was unlikely to satisfy him. But the way she worried about him was surprisingly impressive. Louina told him to close his eyes now. This childish bedtime story session had become the only time his thoughts finally calmed down. Although he found it strange, the boring and cliché fairy tale had somehow managed to soothe him. Then, Louina announced that she would begin reading now. But what she read was not a fairy tale, but a letter addressed to the dear Mrs. Rose Hayworth. The writer stated in the letter that this was the first time he was greeting her by letter, which made Seymour open his eyes in surprise. Louina continued to read, as the writer apologized for leaving Port Fielding without a word last time and admitted to being deeply in debt. Seymour shot upright, overcome with shock. Seymour asked Louina to show him the letter. She smiled and handed it to him. As he read the letter, it turned out that the reason Quentin went to Port Fielding was to borrow money from Marquis Talbot. Quentin explained in the letter that he felt ashamed and wanted to stand on his own 2 feet without relying on the family, so he hadn't told anyone. Although he knew Seymour, as his younger brother, would have helped him if he had asked, as an older brother, he found it humiliating to admit his failure. For this reason, he asked Rose to keep it a secret from Seymour for the time being and thanked her for the funds she provided at the time, which helped him put out an urgent fire. He expressed his gratitude for her help, asserting that he would not forget this kindness, and then mentioned in a postscript that Seymour might face difficulties in securing the Somerset inheritance. He suggested they needed to discuss the matter and asked if she could have Seymour visit the Graham or Somerset properties soon. He added that if that was difficult, it would be enough for her to come see him alone, and if she came, he would do his utmost to ensure Seymour received his rightful share of the inheritance. He wanted to settle the inheritance issue fairly with Seymour. He believed their father would have wanted the same, although he admitted it seemed excessive to talk about inheritance so early. But he wanted Seymour to know that this was what he deserved, and as an older brother who had done nothing for him, this was the only thing he could do. Quentin revealed in the letter that it saddened him when he saw Seymour acting as if he had no older brother. In his eyes, Seymour had been a lonely child since he was young. He ended the letter with a deeply moving plea to Rose, admitting his own inability and begging her to stay by Seymour's side for a long time. The letter was signed Quentin Graham. Seymour leaned back against the bed, overwhelmed with emotion, and broke down in tears. Louina noticed that he couldn't even cry properly, his reaction identical to Dante's. This made her recall Dante and how she had told him his father was a truly good person, to which Dante had agreed. Dante had seemed deeply moved as he hugged the letters, insisting that his father was a truly good man. Returning to the present, Seymour thanked Louina in a voice thick with emotion. Louina gently embraced him. While in his arms, Louina thought about the plot of the original novel, and how due to this incident and misunderstanding, Seymour was supposed to have become the hidden villain after being betrayed by the person he loved most. But she realized that because of her intervention, Jaden's scheme had been stopped ahead of time, and thus Seymour's deep misunderstanding of Rose and Quentin was also resolved. She wondered to herself if this meant her plan to prevent the Duke from becoming the hidden villain had, after all, succeeded peacefully. After all, the Seymour she had seen with her own eyes, while unstable after losing Rose, was not the evil person described in the original novel. Now that Seymour had regained his senses, she hoped he would move up to date for importing the Lily disease treatment. She wondered if things were really going smoothly. Meanwhile, in a dark prison cell, Jaden muttered Louina Whitfield's name in a hate-filled tone from behind iron bars.